Hello everyone, before the starting of the video I would like to request you all to like and subscribe. That's it, thank you and enjoy. Chapter 1 Prologue. Mystic Falls. That was the name of a small town in Virginia, surrounded by dense forests and a river that seemed to cut through the heart of the place. Old red brick houses, quiet streets, and an atmosphere that carried both the weight of tradition and a mysterious air. At first glance, it was just another peaceful town, but there was something almost suffocating in the silence among the trees and the lingering gazes of the locals toward outsiders. It was morning, and as always, the town seemed enveloped in a deceptive calm. The newborn sun pierced through the treetops, painting the streets with golden beams that danced among the leaves. The air held that crisp freshness typical of early autumn, where the cold wasn't yet biting but was already present in the gentle breeze that swept through the town. In the center, a relatively new building stood out by local standards. 5 stories tall, built with understated lines but a certain imposing presence. On the top floor, the penthouse was distinct, spacious, glass-walled, and with modern details that contrasted with the town's traditional architecture. It was the kind of place that drew attention for feeling out of place, as if it had been imported from a metropolis. Inside the apartment, the ambiance blended comfort and luxury. Dark wood furniture, light-toned upholstery, well-placed paintings, and the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the panoramic balcony. Everything seemed carefully planned to exude elegance without excess. In the open kitchen, by the marble countertop, a young man stood. The transparent glass in his hand reflected the golden morning light. He brought the water to his lips and, after a few sips, let out a deep, almost heavy sigh. It was impossible to ignore his presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a defined physique, his body seemed molded to perfection. His facial features resembled those of an Eastern idol, refined, symmetrical, carrying a rare beauty that drew attention effortlessly. His black hair fell lightly over his forehead, and his intense green eyes held a silent melancholy. He placed the glass on the counter, closing his eyes for a moment. "So, it really happened. I've been reborn," he murmured, his low voice filling the apartment's silence. The realization sounded surreal even to him, but every detail around him, every sensation in the body he now inhabited, confirmed it beyond doubt. He was no longer in the world he knew. Originally, he didn't belong to this world. All he remembered was his old life, a soldier returning from yet another exhausting mission. After 3 years serving in Africa, he was finally going to have a few days off. The memory was still vivid in his mind, the familiar streets of his hometown, the anticipation of doing what he loved before joining the army, the simple desire to sleep in his own bed. But he never made it home. He was hit by a truck. All he remembered was the screeching sound of brakes, the crushing pain of the impact. And then, darkness. What came next was hazy. He couldn't describe that place, whether it was heaven, hell, or something in between. He only recalled a strange voice echoing directly in his head, a presence that didn't seem human. It had given him a chance, or perhaps it was just a cruel whim. "Spin the wheel." He obeyed, without understanding. The wheel spun, possibilities blurred before his eyes, and 3 outcomes emerged. The first, to live again inside a TV series he had watched a few times, The Vampire Diaries. The second, to receive the Ryomen Sukuna Megumi Fushiguro model, something he still hadn't fully grasped. And the third, a self-insertion, essentially a past in this world that existed as if he had lived it before being reborn, a version of himself. When he opened his eyes, he was already here, in a body with the appearance of Megumi Fushiguro mixed with Sukuna's in a realistic style, bearing the name Ryomen Sukuna. People simply called him Ryan, a nickname his childhood friends had come up with. Yes, unlike the King of Curses, he had friends here in Mystic Falls, and they were basically the entire cast of the series, except for the Salvatore brothers, whom he had never met. Essentially, he was born and raised in Japan until his parents decided to move to Mystic Falls when he was only 6 years old. His soft Japanese accent still slipped into some of his English words, which quickly caught the attention of his classmates. The kids looked at him with curiosity, some laughed, but Elena was the first to truly approach him. He remembered her first words. "Wanna play with us?" she had asked, with that warm smile that seemed so typical of her from the start. From that moment, everything became easier. Bonnie and Caroline followed, and soon he was part of the small group that always gathered in the town square, school hallways, or lazy afternoons at the Mystic Grill. At 8 years old, He remembered being part of a school play where Caroline insisted he be her partner on stage. She was bossy even back then, and Ryan ended up agreeing only because Elena and Bonnie laughed and said he wouldn't have the guts to refuse. The memories kept piling up. At 10, they spent entire afternoons exploring the town's outskirts, making up stories about the cemetery or the ancient trees in the forest. Elena always made a grumpy face when Caroline invented scary legends, but it was Bonnie who clung to his arm, pretending to be scared, and he never knew if it was just an act. Time passed. By 12, they had an almost unbreakable routine: school in the morning, basketball with Tyler, Matt, and the other boys in the late afternoon, and at night, video games or movies at someone's house. He became part of the extended family that Mystic Falls seemed to offer everyone. Then came adolescence. From 13 to 14, the bonds grew more complicated. The first stolen kiss during a game of Truth or Dare, the nervous laughter when someone dared to ask, "What if you two dated?" The friendships began to carry something more, something they didn't quite know how to handle. And after a complicated incident between him and the girls when they were 15, he returned to the East with his parents and spent the last 2 years there, only coming back about a week ago. And yesterday, just yesterday, he had returned alone. His parents thought it would be good for him to live in Mystic Falls, unaware that this town was a stage for vampires, witches, and werewolves. Far too convenient. He ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath. He felt the strangeness of possessing such a perfect body, so different from his old physique, marked by military scars. It was too beautiful, almost unreal, and that bothered him in a way. His green eyes gazed out at the town through the window. "A second chance, huh?" he said with a half smile. The smile on his lips didn't last long. It soon faded, giving way to a cold look that contrasted with the golden light bathing the town. He thought about his previous life. The worn uniform, the constant smell of gunpowder, the suffocating heat of the African desert. For most, the army was about duty, honor, and patriotism. For him, it was never about that. He joined the armed forces for fun. A twisted kind of fun, sure, but still a way to entertain himself in a world that felt empty to him. Shooting, hunting, facing death head-on, it gave him an almost pleasurable sense of being alive. While others sought glory or survival, he sought only excitement. In many ways, he was always similar to Sukuna. If he didn't like someone, he found a way to eliminate them. If he wanted to eat, he ate. If he desired something, he took it. There were no barriers, no hesitation. Society's morals, the values ingrained in other soldiers, none of it meant anything to him. To him, humans were nothing more than insects, though he was one too, by that label. In any case, humans were fragile creatures, crumbling at the slightest touch, yet still screaming for happiness as if they had some right to it. He never understood. Why did the weak cling so desperately to life? Why did they insist on enduring suffering that was born with them, instead of simply accepting it and fading away in silence? To him, it was illogical, almost pathetic. Happiness was a luxury only the strong should have. There was something cruel in that philosophy, but also a coldness that fit perfectly with who he was. And yet, even with all this indifference, he wasn't entirely a monster. There was still a trace of humanity in him. He enjoyed simple pleasures, a good meal, the intoxication of a night out, the thrill of sleeping with a beautiful woman. Perhaps that was what kept him from losing himself completely, a warped moral code, but still a limit that distinguished him from the original Sukuna. He lowered his gaze to the empty glass on the counter and let out a low laugh. In the end, I guess I'm not so different from the demon I inherited, and speaking of which, Ryan murmured, closing his eyes. Before, he didn't understand what the Ryomen Sukuna Megumi Fushiguro model meant. But in recent days, since waking up in this body, he had begun to instinctively understand bit by bit. He had essentially inherited all of Sukuna's powers. In his mind, he delved deeper into his new memories of this world, finding a set belonging to Sukuna that he hadn't yet accessed but knew was there instinctively. It was as if his mind were a computer, and the file containing Sukuna's memories was in a separate folder he had to click to open. He accessed it slowly. Fortunately, it wasn't anything disturbing about the life of the King of Curses, it was more about his experience and everything related to Jujutsu. At that moment, black marks appeared on his face, and his features took on a more devilish charm as two new, much smaller eyes appeared below his normal ones. He could feel the awakening of his cursed energy and innate technique at that moment, the vastness of an energy that surged in his stomach and coursed through his entire body, which he could easily flex to use his innate techniques. Cursed energy is born from negative emotions like fear, sadness, anger, hatred, and envy. These emotions exist to some degree in most humans, and as a result, the vast majority of humans possess cursed energy. If this amount exceeds a certain threshold, it grants the person the ability to see cursed spirits. These individuals are known as jujutsu sorcerers and are extremely rare among the human race. Cursed energy leaks from the human body, accumulates, and ferments over time until a cursed spirit manifests. This is only the case for non-sorcerers, as sorcerers are trained to control and channel their cursed energy into jujutsu. Cursed energy is the primary power source for any sorcerer or cursed spirit. Sorcerers voluntarily produce this energy, similar to generating electricity, and since negative emotions are the trigger, sorcerers train to create cursed energy from the smallest spark of emotion. It is typically used to power cursed techniques, reinforce the body, or activate talismans, but cursed energy has various uses. The properties of cursed energy vary from person to person, and its connection to the human brain is shrouded in mystery. The total amount of an individual's cursed energy is not determined by how many negative emotions they have but by their innate talent for jujutsu. In his case, he possessed an almost limitless amount of cursed energy. However, he knew with absolute clarity that he was far from the peak of the King of Curses. His cursed energy was only a tenth of what it should be, and that irritated him. The body, though perfect, wasn't monstrous like in Sukuna's memories, only superhuman. Strength, speed, reflexes, endurance, all at levels surpassing any athlete and reaching or even exceeding those of a vampire in this world, but still far from the monstrosity he knew he could achieve. Ryan opened his eyes slowly, his breathing mingling with the electric sensation still coursing through his body. The black marks vanished from his face like smoke, but faint traces remained on his wrists, thin, symmetrical lines, almost like tribal tattoos that burned in a dark hue against his pale skin. He raised his hand, observing those marks with a cold and curious gaze. It was strange, but at the same time, natural. As if it had always belonged to him. Without thinking too much, he raised his index finger. A single, delicate, controlled gesture, but loaded with intent. "Dismantle," he murmured. The empty glass on the counter didn't stand a chance. In an imperceptible instant, it was sliced into two perfect halves, as if cleaved by an invisible blade. No shards flew, no sound of breaking glass echoed. Just two smooth parts, so straight they seemed carved by a machine. Ryan stared at it in silence. The perfection of the cut, the absurd precision of the technique, the coldness of something that could slice through flesh and bone with the same ease it had divided that glass. He had truly inherited Sukuna's experience with his cursed technique instinctively. All that was missing was time for his formerly human body to adapt and return to the peak where he could destroy a city with ease. Fortunately, he wasn't in the world of the Vampire Diaries books, which was a nightmare-level world due to the absurd power levels. Even if he were Sukuna with Mahoraga, he'd be a ragdoll against the book characters. But since this was the TV series world, things were quite different. He smirked. If with just a tenth of Sukuna's original energy he could already do this, what would he be capable of when he reached his peak? He clenched his fist, feeling the cursed energy stir in his stomach like a wild animal, ready to be tamed or unleashed at any moment. A predatory glint crossed his green eyes as the promise of fun and chaos began to form in his mind. He would do whatever he wanted in this world. That's how he had always lived, and that wasn't going to change. Chapter 2 Friends. After thinking about what he would do with the second chance he had received for a while, Ryan remembered that today he would start studying in the third year of Mystic Falls High School would begin that day. He tilted his face toward the digital clock on the counter. There was still a little over an hour left. Enough time to take a shower and get ready. He stretched slowly, his well-defined muscles stretching under the golden morning light, and a low sound escaped from his throat, an almost ironic melody that he hummed through his teeth as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Leaving the counter behind, he crossed the room calmly to the hallway that led to the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, the steam began to spread as soon as he opened the shower faucet. The warm water flowed in perfect lines, hitting against his broad shoulders, sliding down his rigid abdomen that resembled sculpted marble. Ryan stared at his own reflection in the fogged glass. Fortunately, he hadn't inherited Sukuna's marks on his face and the two extra eyes, but his expression and facial features were identical to those of the King of Curses. He just looked a bit more youthful for being 17 years old. Only those marks he had on his wrist existed for now, and he could make them disappear if he wanted, which was good. He didn't want to look like a criminal with tattoos on his face in the future. He thought it was ridiculous. He ran his fingers through his black hair while the water fell, watching the muscles contract and relax under the pale skin. Compared to the worn-out physique, marked by scars from military life, this was like possessing a new weapon in perfect condition, and he appreciated that, silently. The shower was quick, but more than enough to clean himself. When he got out, he dried off and dressed calmly. Gray tailored pants, fitted enough to highlight the line of his legs. A gray shirt as well, simple but elegant. And on top, a light black overcoat that moved with each step, giving him an even more imposing presence. He adjusted the collar, slid his fingers through his wet hair to toss it lightly back, and, satisfied, walked to the front door with the backpack containing all the necessary materials that his predecessor had bought. He turned the key, crossed the hallway, and went down the elevator to the building's underground garage. It didn't take long for him to get there. The underground garage was silent, illuminated only by the cold lamps that reflected on the concrete floor. And there they were, on one side, the black '67 Impala, a gift from his parents. The paint shone as if it were new, the dark windows gave it an elegant and imposing air. It was a classic car, drawing attention from anyone who understood the least about automobiles. On the other, the Nissan Skyline GT-RR 34. Black, shining as if it had just come out of a polishing shop. Ryan stopped between the two vehicles and remained silent for a few seconds. The memories came naturally to his mind. The Skyline hadn't been handed to him on a silver platter. Every cent had been earned while living in Japan, balancing studies, temporary jobs, and an almost stubborn determination. Buying the car had already been a challenge. Bringing it to Mystic Falls was another even bigger one, full of paperwork, absurd fees, and headaches. But in the end, it was there. As for the Impala, well, it was a gift from his parents for him coming to live here. A hell of a gift, by the way. They thought he would need a new car because his Skyline would take a while to arrive due to all the import problems, but fortunately, it was faster than expected. He took the Skyline key out of his pocket and twirled it in his fingers, almost laughing to himself at his own indecision. "Today it's going to be you," he said quietly, looking at the Nissan. In his past life, he had an opportunity to drive a car like that when he was in the army. In the barracks, cars like that weren't exactly common, even more so in the middle of a desert of dust and the smell of gunpowder. But the colonel was eccentric. He had imported the Nissan just to show off, as if it were a trophy among weapons and medals, and he had earned his trust enough to have the opportunity to drive it. It was on a stuffy night, during a routine patrol that ended earlier than expected, that the colonel tossed him the keys with a mocking smile. He still remembered those words, "Let's see if you know how to handle something besides a rifle." Sitting in that leather seat, feeling the engine roar under his feet, that had stirred something in him. Since then, he had cultivated the desire to have his own. And in this life, he apparently got it handed to him on a silver platter. It was somewhat ironic. He opened the door, settled into the seat, and pulled the door calmly. The interior had that characteristic smell of new leather mixed with gasoline and an expensive cologne he wore. He inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine woke up with a deep rumble, vibrating through the car's body and echoing through the garage. Ryan rested his hands on the steering wheel, letting his fingers trace the texture of the leather. He gave a light rev, just to hear the noise louder, and a smile escaped. He then put it in gear and left the garage. The engine's rumble reverberated off the walls of the underground parking lot until it exploded in a metallic echo when he exited onto the street and turned left, leaving the city center and heading toward where the Mystic Falls School was. The asphalt, still damp from the morning dew, reflected the headlights like a broken mirror. He drove the car calmly through the roads of Mystic Falls. The streets were still half empty, only a few residents tending their gardens or leaving for work. The fresh wind came in through the open window, mixed with the internal smell that always lingered in the car. There was no rush. Every now and then, he accelerated a bit more just to feel the engine's response, but soon returned to the normal pace. Driving through those narrow, tree-filled streets had its charm, quite different from the hustle of big cities. Soon, the Mystic Falls High School sign appeared, surrounded by tall trees and the typical movement of a school morning. The main building rose right ahead, with red bricks and wide windows, the same traditional American style he had seen in movies and now faced in real life. The lawn was well maintained, and some groups of students scattered across the parking lot and the main entrance, chatting animatedly before the bell. He guided the skyline to one of the more distant spots, but it didn't help much. The deep rumble of the engine had already turned some heads toward him even before parking. As soon as he turned off the car, he noticed the whispers starting, mixed with curious giggles. He opened the door and got out calmly, slinging the backpack over his shoulder. The black overcoat contrasted with the sunny morning, but matched his demeanor perfectly. His black hair, still damp, fell in a rebellious way, and his young, handsome face in an almost impossible to ignore manner seemed sculpted to draw attention. It wasn't intentional, but as soon as he stepped out of the car, some conversations simply stopped. The girls, in particular, were the first to stare. Their eyes scanned not just the car different from any other there, but mainly the way Ryan moved, firm, confident, broad shoulders, physique marked by the elegant cut of his clothes. He didn't look like a simple high school student, he looked older, almost like an idol straight out of a stage in Tokyo or Seoul. A group of girls near the entrance exchanged glances and muffled laughs, trying to disguise their blatant attention. Others just followed with their eyes, without hiding the interest. Some boys, on the other hand, frowned, already uncomfortable with the involuntary comparison. All that went through their minds was that by the car, the guy was rich, handsome, and possessed a natural body that every man would aspire to just by looking. In other words, he was simply perfect. All that was missing was having a big tool, and that wouldn't be too unfair. How would they compete? Ryan slung the backpack over his shoulder and, with a dry click, locked the skyline. The key twirled between his fingers for a moment, in a simple, almost distracted gesture, before being tucked into his pocket. He took a few steps, feeling the eyes on him. The campus had the typical start of class air, mixed conversations, the distant sound of laughter, the noise of sneakers against the cement. The sun filtered through the treetops and reflected on the windows of the main building, illuminating part of the red brick facade. He followed the paved path that cut through the well-maintained lawn. On one side, a group of athletes already dressed in school jackets followed him with their eyes, some with arched eyebrows, others just exchanging low comments. On the other, some girls who were sitting on the grass stopped fiddling with their phones to watch him walk, laughing among themselves as if they had just gotten a topic for the rest of the morning. It was then that he heard a familiar voice behind him. "I can't believe it, Ryan." He turned and came face to face with Tyler Lockwood, walking hurriedly beside Matt Donovan. The two had expressions of genuine surprise, but smiled right after. Those two boys with whom he had spent afternoons playing ball and chatting, now they were there, almost adult men, but still recognizable from what they were as children. Matt's blonde hair and blue eyes were unmistakable, and that look of Tyler's like he wanted to cause trouble too. Now Tyler seemed like the typical popular boy. He was tall, with an imposing physical structure, an athletic body that reflected an active lifestyle often focused on sports. His hair was dark brown, slightly messy, with a casual style, but with a certain, bad boy, vibe. His clothing seemed to add even more to that label. He wore a black leather jacket that complemented his, bad boy, style, with a tighter-fitting t-shirt underneath, and dark jeans that accentuated his posture. On the other hand, Matt had a more calm and kind vibe. He had a clean and more discreet appearance, with light blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed to reflect his more sensitive nature. His body, although athletic, wasn't as muscular as Tyler's, but still strong. He was the type of guy who stood out more for his personality than his appearance, with a more accessible and less pretentious way, always willing to help others. He was dressed in a red polo shirt and dark jeans, with a simple but well-cut style. "Look who decided to show up," said Tyler, lightly patting his shoulder. "When did you get back, man? We didn't even know." Ryan sketched a side smile, adjusting the backpack. "It's been a short time." Matt approached, visibly excited. "We thought you weren't coming back anymore. Mystic Falls isn't exactly the most fun city in the world." Ryan gave a light laugh. "Yeah, although it's not the most fun city in the world, I still like it. There are things that never change." Tyler crossed his arms, studying him from head to toe. "Well, some things have changed. Just look at you, you can't even compare to the kid we knew." Matt laughed, agreeing. "You're more like a magazine model than a third-year student." Ryan shook his head, still smiling, but preferred not to comment. Instead, He let out a, "And you guys? Still the same?" "Practically," said Matt, shrugging. "I still work after classes to help at home, and Tyler still thinks he's the king of the school." "Hey," protested Tyler, but in a joking tone. "It's not thinking, it's being. Now, come on, man, let's catch up." At the end of his words, he motioned for them to go to the shade of a tree near the parking lot. Ryan followed them, and as soon as they moved away from the bustle, Matt got straight to the point. "So, how was life out there? It's been a while since you disappeared." Ryan leaned against the tree and adjusted the backpack on his shoulder. "It was good. I worked a lot, studied even more. I managed to save enough money to buy that machine over there." He pointed with his chin to the skyline, which shone from afar. The two followed his gaze, and Tyler let out a low whistle. "You're kidding, that's a Skyline R34. Matt widened his eyes. "I've only seen it in movies, like Fast and Furious. I can't believe you have one of those." Ryan laughed, almost enjoying the reaction. "Yeah, but it's not like Brian O'Connor's. His was silver with blue details, this one's all black. I customized it to be more discreet, as much as possible." Tyler still seemed hypnotized. "Man, what's this got? About 280 horsepower stock. Twin turbo, inline 6, RB26DETT engine, right?" "Almost right." Ryan shook his head, correcting. "The original is that, but I changed the engine. Swapped the turbo, tinkered with the AQ, reinforced suspension. Today it's running with way more power than the stock 280. It can easily pass 500 horsepower." Matt let out a nervous laugh. 500, that's racing stuff." "Yeah," Ryan shrugged, with a half smile. "But I like the feeling. It's not just the noise, it's the control you feel on the wheel." Tyler slapped his arm, excited. "It's decided, you're gonna have to let me take it for a spin after class." "Me too," added Matt, a bit awkwardly, but clearly thrilled. Ryan just raised his hand in surrender. "No problem, just don't crash it, because no insurance covers the emotional value of this machine." Tyler laughed loudly, and without missing a beat, pulled a football from his backpack. "So let's do this. Warm up our arms before class. 20 minutes is still enough time." He tossed the ball to Ryan, who caught it easily. The gesture brought a strange sense of nostalgia, memories of carefree afternoons on the neighborhood lawn. "You still remember how to do it?" Tyler teased. Ryan smiled sideways. "Wanna bet?" He tossed the ball to Matt, who grabbed it firmly and laughed. The trio started playing right there, between passes and casual taunts. They were just three old friends, laughing and playing ball as if nothing had changed. For Ryan, that had a curious contrast. Sukuna would never stoop to wasting time with a simple game like that. He would feel offended to be among mortals. But no, playing ball with Tyler and Matt was just normal. It didn't awaken arrogance or great enthusiasm. After a few passes, Tyler tucked the ball under his arm and shot a suspicious look. "Okay, but now tell the truth, man. How did you get that Skyline? Don't give me an easy story, because that car costs a fortune." "Besides normal jobs, I worked as a model for a while. Made some right investments too. Nothing too glamorous, just, it worked." Matt laughed softly, shaking his head. "That explains a lot. The clothing style, the hair always in place. Man, you look like you just came from a photo shoot." "Don't exaggerate." Ryan shrugged. "Oh, come on," Matt insisted, with an amused smile. "With that appearance, I bet you've dated half the girls in Japan." Ryan let out a brief, almost ironic laugh. "I dated a few, yeah. But nothing serious. I never stayed in one place for long, so it didn't make sense to tie myself down." Tyler raised an eyebrow, a mischievous smile appearing. "Oh, I see our big guy hasn't forgotten the girls from Mystic Falls. Which one were you in love with again? Bonnie, Caroline, or Elena? You still like one of them?" For a moment, Ryan stayed silent. The smile faded as he shook his head slowly, remembering his predecessor's memories of that night when everything had gone off the rails with the three. "No, Tyler, that's in the past." Tyler twirled the ball between his hands and looked at Matt with a half-provocative smile. "Good, I think if you went after Elena, Matt would be sad. Since she dumped him not too long ago." Matt's face closed immediately, his blue eyes shifting to the ground as if he wanted to end the subject right there. Ryan arched an eyebrow, staring at him with curiosity. "Really?" Matt let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head lightly. "Yeah, but it didn't work out. Thanks for reminding me, Tyler. Sorry, man, Tyler grumbled. Matt took a deep breath and turned his gaze back to Ryan, trying to resume the mood. Anyway, let's leave that talk behind. We have better things to talk about, like catching up with you. How long has it been since I last saw you? Almost 4 years. 3.5, around there. Ryan adjusted the backpack on his shoulder and gave a half smile. Enough time to seem like a whole lifetime. Tyler nodded, tossing the ball back to Matt. Yeah, a lot has changed around here in that time. But some things stay the same, and you'll notice quickly. Ryan received another pass from Tyler, twisted his body, and tossed the ball back to Matt. The gesture came out light, without effort, but firm. After a few minutes, he stopped, breathing deeply, and lowered his head in a half smile. Okay, that's enough for today. I don't want to enter the classroom sweaty on the first day. Tyler laughed. You're afraid of messing up your hair, admit it. Ryan just shook his head, ignoring it, and walked to where he had left the backpack, hung on the low branch of the tree. He slung the strap over his shoulder and adjusted the overcoat. It was then that his eyes caught a blonde figure passing by the steps of the school's main entrance. The golden hair reflected the morning sun, and even from afar, he recognized her immediately. Caroline Forbes, animated as always, chatting with some friends while walking into the building. Ryan stayed silent for a few seconds, observing, before letting out a short breath. Then he turned to Tyler and Matt. I forgot to take care of something before class. See you later. He didn't give many explanations. He just walked away with firm steps, crossing the lawn in the opposite direction from the main entrance. Tyler twirled the ball between his hands and looked at Matt, raising an eyebrow. Did you understand any of that? Matt shook his head, without taking his eyes off Ryan. Not at all. The two exchanged glances for a moment, divided between curiosity and the fear of asking. But in the end, they just let the subject die there. Chapter 3 I am honest. After saying goodbye to Tyler and Matt, Ryan walked towards the school building where he had seen a certain blonde walking in that direction, someone who was recognizable to him because she looked exactly like the actress who played the character in the television series. The reason for that, well, the truth was simple. Between hanging out chatting with guys or seeking the company of a girl, the second option always seemed infinitely more interesting to him. He quickened his pace a bit when he realized she was about to enter the building. Without letting her or her friends notice, he subtly changed his path, circling around until he appeared behind her. So close like that, he finally took a look at the girl in question. She was extremely beautiful. Her platinum blonde hair was impeccable, shining under the natural light of the hallway. Her blue eyes, as clear as the sky, were full of vibrant energy, and her posture exuded confidence. Her hips were well defined, her slim waist gave her an hourglass silhouette, while her long and toned legs, her naturally voluminous breasts, were proportional to her body. She was wearing a light pink short-sleeved blouse, fitted to her body, which highlighted her curves in a subtle and elegant way. She wore a high-waisted skirt in a beige tone, which had a slight slit at the bottom, giving it a touch of femininity. Her long and shapely legs were even more evident due to the skirt, while a pair of high-heeled sandals completed the look. She was about 20 centimeters shorter than him, practically reaching his chest in terms of height. Caroline was in the middle of an animated explanation to two classmates, laughing loudly and gesturing with her hands as if telling the most important story in the world. Her energy naturally filled the space, attracting glances without her even noticing. Wanting to have a little fun, he leaned slightly and spoke softly, close to her ear. Still so animated early on, Caroline. The blonde froze, surprised. Her friends looked curious, but Caroline turned quickly, ready to retort until her eyes met his. She stayed still for a second, the air caught in her chest, as if she couldn't believe it. But soon her eyes shone, her mouth opened in an incredulous smile full of emotion. Ryan, her scream echoed through the courtyard, loaded with joy. Without thinking twice, Caroline jumped into his arms, hugging him tightly, almost suffocating. My God, I can't believe it, she said, laughing and crying at the same time against his shoulder. You came back, you really came back. Ryan enveloped her in a firm hug, letting a smile escape from the corner of his mouth. I said I wasn't going to disappear forever, he murmured, with a low and calm voice. Caroline pulled away just enough to look at his face up close, her eyes still teary, but full of happiness. She touched his arm, as if she needed to make sure it was real. You have no idea how much I missed you. Ryan observed her for a few seconds, the soft smile remaining on his lips. Then he just ran his hand through her hair in an almost instinctive gesture, without needing words. Caroline's classmates, who had been standing watching, exchanged glances in silence, murmured something low and soon discreetly walked away, leaving the two alone. But Caroline was so focused on Ryan that she didn't even notice. She took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions, but her eyes couldn't detach from him. That was the same boy who had left years ago, but at the same time, it wasn't. The boy she knew had grown up, and what was in front of her now seemed straight out of a dream. The gray shirt molded his chest and broad shoulders, while the tailored pants accentuated every line of his strong legs. His black hair fell in a disordered way although combed back, but each strand seemed to have been placed there on purpose. And the eyes. God, those green eyes. She swallowed hard, feeling her heart beat too fast. Before, Ryan already made her legs tremble with a simple smile. Now, he seemed to have transformed into something impossible to ignore. A magazine man, as Matt had commented a little while ago, only even better, because he was there, in front of her, holding her in his arms. Caroline blinked a few times, unable to hide the blush that colored her cheeks. You look different," she murmured, her voice faltering slightly. She tried to laugh to disguise it, but the sound came out nervous, almost childish. "I mean, not just different, you're a total hottie." The words escaped before she could hold them back, and as soon as she realized, she brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Ryan arched an eyebrow, a smile appearing on the corner of his lips upon noticing her spontaneous slip. "Really?" he teased, the tone low and loaded with amusement. Caroline wanted to die right there. But at the same time, she felt her heart vibrate with the way he looked at her as if she had just gained all his attention. She looked away for a second, biting her lower lip, but soon returned to face him, unable to pretend indifference. "It's not like it's news. I always thought you were gorgeous, Ryan. But now," she took a deep breath, laughing softly from nervousness. "Now it's even unfair." Ryan didn't respond immediately, he just observed her in silence, his eyes scanning her face, as if analyzing every detail. Then, calmly, he ran his fingers over her flushed cheek, a light gesture, but one that made Caroline hold her breath. "You've grown up too," he said finally, in a simple but firm tone. "And you're still beautiful." Caroline felt her chest warm, a mix of happiness and incredulity. If before it was already hard not to fall in love with him, now it seemed impossible to resist. She bit her lip, feeling her cheeks burn even more, but tried to disguise it with that nervous way that always came when she was caught off guard. "You can't just say things like that, you know. I'm already trying not to faint here." Ryan laughed softly, his voice loaded with calm. "I didn't imagine it would leave you so flustered." Caroline huffed, crossing her arms, but unable to hide the smile. "Oh, please, you know very well the effect you have. You always knew." He tilted his head, curious. "Really?" "Yes," she responded too quickly, and soon regretted it, widening her eyes. "I mean, not that it's not like I spent years waiting for you to come back, or something like that." Ryan arched an eyebrow, clearly amused by her clumsy attempt. "Really not." Caroline rolled her eyes, but laughed, shaking her head. "Okay, maybe a little. But this stays between us, got it? I have a reputation to maintain." Ryan smiled from the corner, looking at her with that calm air that only made the situation worse. "You got it, your secret's safe with me." Caroline trying to regain a bit of composure, but still biting her lip without noticing. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and stared at him with those blue eyes full of curiosity. "Okay, but you're going to have to tell me everything. What happened in these years? You just disappeared, Ryan. I spent a good time wondering if you were alive, if you had, I don't know, given up on Mystic Falls." Ryan kept the smile on the corner of his lips, but his eyes didn't blink, fixed on her as if analyzing every reaction. "They were busy years. School, work, nothing worth a biography. But I think I kept myself occupied enough not to go crazy." Caroline arched an eyebrow, not disguising her curiosity. "You don't seem exactly the type who goes crazy." "I'm not," he replied, his voice low and loaded with an almost provocative calm. Caroline laughed, shaking her head, but soon changed the subject, trying to seem casual. "And about dating, don't tell me you stayed alone all this time." That would be, I don't know, impossible. Ryan tilted his head a bit, as if thinking about the answer, but the truth is that the choice of words came easily, without any effort. I went out with some girls, yes. Nothing serious. Just distractions. He said that in the most natural way in the world, as if talking about changing shirts. Caroline felt her stomach churn with the coldness of the word, but at the same time, she couldn't avoid the shiver that ran down her spine. The way he spoke seemed simple, but carried a dangerous, almost magnetic intensity. Distractions, huh, she repeated, biting her lip, this time more to hold back the smile than from nervousness. You really changed a bit compared to a few years ago. Ryan shrugged. Maybe I just got more honest. Caroline laughed, but the sound came out low, almost shy, which was rare for her. Great, because I want honesty too. Are you going to stay? Or are you going to disappear again when I get used to having you around? I have no plans to disappear. Not now, Ryan replied casually, pretending to be mysterious. Her heart raced. The answer wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear, but still brought a strange, almost sweet relief. Caroline smiled, half nervous, fiddling with her hair as she always did when trying to disguise anxiety. Not now, you know that doesn't sound reliable at all, right? Ryan raised his eyebrow, that same smile from the corner returning to his face. Then keep me here, if you can. She was speechless for a moment. You're unbearable, Caroline murmured, biting her lip to contain a bigger smile. And you still like that? Caroline rolled her eyes, but couldn't deny it. The truth was that her body screamed yes, even if her mouth tried to pretend indifference. She wanted to throw more provocations, but upon facing those intense green eyes, all that came out was a light and nervous laugh. Okay, maybe I like it a little. But don't get cocky, Ryan. I never do, he responded with a naturalness that bordered on arrogance, but without sounding like a joke. It was simply part of him. She shook her head, incredulous. It was so irritating and at the same time so attractive that Caroline almost hated admitting how she felt. She crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly, as if preparing to give a sermon. Oh, please, you've always been like this, you know. Arrogant, always. In school, it was obvious. Like when the teacher asked everyone to turn in the history paper and you turned in 15 perfect pages, 15. While the rest of the class barely managed 3. And you still smiled when she praised you in front of everyone. Ryan arched his eyebrow, but said nothing. And there was also that time at the science fair. Remember, while everyone made little baking soda volcanoes, you showed up with a machine that actually worked, I don't know for what, but won a state medal. Narcissist. He tilted his head, pretending to think. It was a homemade distillation machine. I just wanted to prove I could do better than the school handout. Caroline huffed, but couldn't contain the laugh. And let's not forget the tests. You finished first, turned in the paper and still made a point of giving that smile from the corner to the teacher. As if saying, look, I finished before everyone. Unbearable. Ryan crossed his arms, the smile growing. I couldn't help it, my brains worked faster. Brains, plural. Caroline raised her eyebrow, incredulous. Of course, he shrugged, it would be unfair to compete with just one. Caroline slapped her hand on her forehead, laughing, but unbelieving. You're a lost cause. Ryan approached a little, the tone of his voice lower, provocative. And even so, I remember you still liked to compete with me in everything. You couldn't resist. She blushed, biting her lip. Maybe because someone needed to remind you that you weren't perfect. And did you succeed? Caroline hesitated, but ended up laughing. Not at all. She stopped, gesturing with her hands, without even noticing that her smile was getting wider and wider. Anyway, you always made it seem easy. It was irritating. Well, maybe I am a little arrogant. A little, she raised her eyebrows, indignant. Ryan gave a somewhat arrogant smile as he spoke. But I have the right to be, don't you think? Caroline widened her eyes, unable to believe his level of self-confidence. You're impossible, narcissist. She stretched each syllable with emphasis, but the tone was closer to a laugh than a real accusation. Deep down, she couldn't deny it. Ryan had a natural talent for everything. Sports, grades, even in discussions, he seemed always one step ahead. That's why he had been so popular back then, to the point that even Elena, Bonnie and her, even being so different from each other, had nurtured a crush on him. Everything got out of control that night, and the consequences of what happened made them spend practically the following year, distant from each other, trying to deal with the feelings, each in her own way. Caroline looked away for a moment, as if pushing away too many memories, but the smile on the corner of her lips remained. She took a deep breath and returned to face him, with that same playful gleam in her eyes. "Anyway, you're still the same in that part at least." Ryan didn't seem bothered by Caroline's accusations. On the contrary, his calm smile remained. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "Well, I really just got more honest, like I said before. If I want to do something, I'll do it. If I want to say something, I'll say it." She blinked, surprised by the sudden change in his tone, her smile faltering just for an instant. He continued casually, "I still have some things to take care of before classes start. But we'll see each other soon." Caroline bit her lip, not hiding the slight disappointment, but soon recovered the animated smile she always used to disguise feelings that were too strong. "Okay, but don't disappear again, got it? I won't accept a second time." He looked at her firmly, and for a moment, the air between them seemed heavy with unspoken meanings. "I won't," he replied, simple, but with a certainty that made her heart race. Before Caroline could react, Ryan took a step back, and started to walk away down the hallway. She stayed still, following him with her eyes until he disappeared into the crowd of students. Only then did she release the breath she hadn't even realized she was holding, bringing a hand to her chest to try to calm her accelerated heart. An involuntary smile escaped her lips. He was back. And nothing in Mystic Falls would be the same. She just wanted to see when Bonnie and Elena found out he was back. But wait, wouldn't this get complicated? She was so excited to see him again that she forgot what happened that night. It seems things are going to get weird for a while between the three of them again, and it was a bad time considering that it hasn't been long since Elena lost her parents. Chapter 4. We were teenagers back then. The soft sound of the alarm filled the room, bringing Elena Gilbert back to consciousness. With her eyes still closed, she took a deep breath, smelling the familiar scent of her pillow, before slowly letting out the air. She didn't want to wake up. She didn't want to face another day where everything around her seemed hollow, meaningless. But she had to get up. With a resigned sigh, Elena opened her eyes and blinked a few times, adjusting to the faint light coming through the half-open curtains. The room was still the same, the furniture in the same place, the books stacked on the desk, the photos on the wall. But at the same time, everything seemed different, as if that were the first time she woke up in a world where her parents no longer existed. She turned in bed, reached for the nightstand, and picked up her diary. The leather cover was soft under her fingers. Hesitant, she opened it to the blank page and grabbed the pen, trying to gather words that made sense. "Dear diary, today will be different. It has to be. I will smile, and it will be believable. My smile will say, 'I'm fine, thank you. Yes, I feel much better. I will no longer be the sad little girl who lost her parents. I will start over, be someone new. It's the only way I can get through this.'" She closed the diary and ran her hand over her face, trying to push away the melancholy. She didn't want that feeling to consume her first thing in the morning. With effort, she got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected her tired expression, her brown eyes still swollen from the nights when she tried, unsuccessfully, to hold back the tears. Taking a deep breath, she washed her face with cold water, hoping to wake up a bit more. After putting on dark jeans and a simple blouse, she went down the stairs, smelling the aroma of coffee coming from the kitchen. Upon entering, she found Jenna Summers, her aunt, in front of the fridge trying to find something to prepare for breakfast for them. "Toast. I can make toast," she said while looking in her direction. "No, the coffee's fine, Aunt Jenna," Elena said without much enthusiasm, serving herself coffee. Jeremy entered the kitchen, his eyes tired, his hair messy, and his mood, as always, hard to deal with. "Is there coffee?" he said to the two without waiting for an answer, going to get some coffee. Jenna stopped for a moment, looking at the toaster as if trying to find some deep meaning in the simple task. She didn't have time to search for answers, but her mind was distant, trying to control all the little things that seemed to slip away. The moment of tension soon dissipated when she responded, trying to stay calm. "Your first day of school and I'm totally unprepared. Lunch money." She walked until she stopped in front of Elena and offered the money. Elena gave a light sigh, her eyes focused on her aunt's hands. "No need, I have some." On the other hand, Jeremy, who had served himself coffee, took the money. Jenna walked all over the kitchen gathering her things while saying, "Anything else? A number 2 pencil, what am I forgetting?" Elena looked in her direction while drinking a bit of coffee and asked, "Don't you have a big presentation today?" Jenna stopped, as if finally remembering something urgent, made a face. She was forgetting so many details, as if she had lost control of her own life since Elena and Jeremy had become her responsibility. But, for a moment, she tried to put things in order. She looked at the clock and panic filled her eyes. "I'm meeting with my thesis advisor at, now. Damn." Elena knew that this meant her aunt was about to disappear into her own busy routine. Jenna's life had become a dance between her career and the responsibility of being the maternal figure that Elena and Jeremy needed. It was a difficult balance, but she never complained. And even with the chaos of the morning, Elena felt grateful for Jenna's presence in her life. "Then go. We'll be fine." Jenna seemed to hesitate, as if trying to believe Elena's words. She still wasn't sure how everything would unfold, but the worry in her eyes was undeniable. She wanted to be a good aunt, a good guardian, but she knew there was always something missing. She didn't have all the answers and, at that moment, didn't even know where to start. Without further words, she grabbed her bag and car keys. She gave one last look at the two, with a light sigh of resignation, and left through the door, leaving behind the emotional mess that always accompanied those moments. She knew they were growing up, that their lives were becoming something she couldn't control. After she left, Elena turned her gaze to her brother who was trying to drink his coffee and asked, "Are you okay?" "Don't start." Jeremy, with his usual posture, interrupted, his voice colder and more disinterested than anyone could expect, and left the kitchen. Elena finished drinking her coffee while watching Jeremy leave, not seeing that behind her on the television, a poster quickly flashed, with photos of 2 smiling faces, Brooke and Darren. Missing was the highlighted word, but Elena, already absorbed in her own thoughts, didn't pay attention to the news. The poster disappeared quickly from the screen, giving way to other ads and local news. But for Elena, none of that seemed important at that moment. She put the cup in the sink and turned to go on with her day. Leaving the house, Elena gave one last look at her home before heading to Bonnie's car, the morning sun illuminating the quiet streets of Mystic Falls. She felt the soft wind on her face as she walked, trying to leave her worries behind and focus on starting a new school year. The day was beginning, and she felt a slight premonition that things could be different now, but she was determined to move forward, despite everything. She finally reached the car parked on the sidewalk. Bonnie's Chevy Impala was parked a bit crookedly, as always, with the driver's window open. Bonnie is a young woman with short, dark brown and voluminous hair, with natural waves that fall softly around her face. Her eyes are dark green, and she has a generally curious and energetic expression, which reflects her extroverted nature. Regarding her clothes, she wears a casual and comfortable style, but with a touch of youthful charm. She is wearing a short-sleeved purple blouse, which complements her skin tone well. The blouse has discreet details that give it a relaxed but still stylish look. She also wears straight-cut jeans, which are simple but suitable for everyday routine. To complete, she is wearing comfortable sneakers, perfect for the hurried walks she usually takes. Elena smiled, knowing that her friend was probably in a hurry, as always, but she felt grateful that she was there, ready to accompany her on another day. "Hey, Elle, come on, it's almost time for class to start. And before you ask, yes, I'm late." Elena laughed softly, her expression more relaxed now. She opened the car door and got into the passenger seat, throwing her backpack on the seat next to her. Bonnie had a spontaneous smile that always brought comfort to her. "I was starting to think maybe you forgot about me." It's hard to keep up with Bonnie Bennett's frantic pace. "Ah, you know me. I never forget you, Elena. I'm just a little disorganized this morning." Bonnie started the car, and the two left her street. Elena looked out the window as the car passed several familiar spots in Mystic Falls. The town seemed so normal and quiet, but deep down, she felt that something was different, as if something was about to change. Bonnie and Elena were heading to school in Bonnie's car, the sound of the radio playing softly as the road stretched out before them. Bonnie, as always, was chattering about what seemed to be an endless topic. She was excited, gesturing with her hands while talking about her grandmother's ideas about her medium powers. "So, Grams is telling me that I'm a medium. Our ancestors were from Salem, witches and all that. I know, crazy, but she's talking non-stop about it, and I'm like, put that woman in a home already. Bonnie continued with a laugh, but soon paused, thoughtful. But then I started thinking. I predicted Obama, I predicted Heath Ledger, and I still think Florida will break off and turn into little resort islands. Elena, back to the car. Elena snapped out of her stupor with her friend's words. She quickly apologized. I did it again, didn't I? I was spacing out again. Look, sorry, Bonnie, you were telling me that. Bonnie, with an enthusiastic expression, interrupted. That now I'm a medium now. Right, Elena smiled softly, feeling a bit ashamed for not paying attention. Okay, so predict something. About me. Bonnie, with a serious look, pretended to be concentrated and said with a smile, I see. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, followed by something hitting the car window hard, forcing the car to stop on the side of the road. Bonnie and Elena screamed in fright. What was that? Oh my God. Elena, are you okay? Bonnie asked Elena, concern stamped on her face after absorbing what had happened. Elena, who was a bit dazed, responded quickly, trying to reassure her friend, it's okay. I'm fine. Bonnie quickly apologized saying, I think it was a bird or something. It came out of nowhere. Seriously, I can't be scared of cars for the rest of my life. Elena assured with a somewhat melancholic look. Bonnie looked at her friend and her expression became a bit more intense, finishing her words, I predict this year is going to be kick-ass. And I predict all the sad and dark times are over and you're going to be beyond happy. She gave Elena an encouraging look, wanting her friend to believe that good things were coming. Elena smiled genuinely for the first time. The two didn't notice the crow standing outside as if watching both of them. Bonnie quickly maneuvered the car and continued on the way. She drove calmly to the school parking lot, parking the car next to a black skyline that stood imposingly among other vehicles. The dark paint of the car shone lightly under the morning sun, catching the attention of anyone passing by. Elena and Bonnie stopped, with the car parked. Elena was the first to look towards the skyline. Bonnie, who was already paying attention to everything around, followed Elena's gaze. Bonnie was the only one who asked, do you think it's some new guys? Or maybe some weird guy from town? I don't know. I don't know, Elena said distractedly before getting out of the car with Bonnie. The two walked across the campus towards the school building. As they entered through the door and turned a hallway, Bonnie spoke with a smile, we're seriously lacking guys. She paused as a blonde woman passed in front of them, with a somewhat exaggerated style. Look at Kelly Beach's shower curtain. She looks like, do people still say, slut? While asking, the two walked until they leaned against a pair of lockers. Elena laughed, shaking her head with a smile, oh, no, that's already gone. We're way beyond that. Bonnie gave a giggle, playing with Elena's tone. Get boyfriends, invent slang. It's a busy year. She looked around, as if analyzing every bit of the campus with a sharp eye, before fiddling with her locker. Elena, meanwhile, was more focused on her own emotions. Her gaze drifted to the other side of the hallway, where Matt Donovan was fiddling with his locker. She felt kind of weird, and waved to him, but Matt didn't even greet her back. He continued fiddling with his things, clearly ignoring her greeting, before leaving. Elena stopped for a moment, with a small sigh and leaned against the locker, while Bonnie observed attentively. He hates me, Elena said, almost without thinking, a bit sad about Matt's attitude. Bonnie, who always knew how to handle this kind of situation, made a slightly ironic expression, but at the same time understanding. She gave a light smile, shaking her head. That's not hate, that's, you dumped me, but I'm too cool to show it, but secretly I'm listening to Air Supply's greatest hits. Elena looked at Bonnie, resigned while asking, seriously, Bonnie? Air Supply? Bonnie gave a mischievous smile and a shrug. It's a classic. Anyone still listening to All Out of Love is clearly trying to ignore the pain, but can't. She laughed softly, noticing Elena's expression. Suddenly, Caroline appeared out of nowhere and, with her characteristic energy, enveloped Elena in a tight hug, as if she hadn't seen her in years. Elena, oh my God, Caroline said while giving Elena a tight hug, how are you? Elena gave a forced smile as she accepted the hug. Caroline stepped back, still holding Elena by the shoulders, her eyes shining, but now with a touch of concern. She looked at Elena with a critical gaze, almost as if examining her friend, as if she wanted to make sure everything was okay. It's so good to see you, Caroline said, with a shine in her eyes. How is she? Is she okay? Caroline asked, turning to Bonnie. Her action made Elena feel a bit uncomfortable. Elena felt a bit pressured by the incessant questions, but smiled, trying to ease the tension. Caroline, I'm right here. And I'm fine, thanks. Caroline looked at her fixedly, still seeming not very convinced. Really? She asked, the doubt evident in her voice, as if she didn't fully believe Elena was okay. Elena nodded, without hesitating. Yes, much better. She tried to reinforce her words with a light smile, wishing Caroline would feel at ease with the answer. Caroline seemed to relax a bit, but the concern was still there. Ah, poor you, she said, with a hint of pity, before pulling Elena into another tight hug, almost as if trying to rub the feeling of relief into her. Elena smiled forcedly, feeling a bit suffocated by the intensity of the gesture. Okay, Caroline, she said, trying to add a touch of humor to the situation, but also wanting her friend to know she was fine. Caroline stepped out of the hug after a few moments. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder while saying with a certain enthusiasm, "Oh my God, you guys won't believe who I just saw." Caroline exclaimed, turning to her friends with a shine in her eyes. Bonnie arched an eyebrow, already used to Caroline's dramatic energy. Let me guess, some mysterious and incredibly hot new student that you're already planning to conquer. No, I mean, he is incredibly hot, but he's not new, Caroline said, holding the suspense for a second before dropping. Ryan is back in Mystic Falls. Caroline's words hung in the air for a moment. Elena blinked a few times, surprised. Bonnie, beside her, froze with an expression that was a mix of various emotions. The two exchanged a quick look, as if one expected the other to confirm if they had heard right. Ryan, Elena repeated softly, almost unbelieving. Bonnie bit her lip, looking away to the ground for a second before laughing nervously. You must be kidding. After, what, 2 years in Japan? 3.5, Elena corrected, automatically. The memory came too fast, and she regretted speaking. Bonnie looked at her sideways, with a small smile, but her eyes said something else. Caroline, oblivious to the tense atmosphere between the two, continued excited. Yes, I mean, when he left he was already gorgeous, but now, he's totally different. He looks like one of those drama idols. Elena took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Her heart was racing, and it had nothing to do with what Caroline was saying. It was more about the memories that came with that name. Bonnie, on the other hand, crossed her arms and tried to stay practical. I can't believe he just came back without telling anyone. Not a message, nothing. Ah, come on, Bonnie. Caroline rolled her eyes. You two were super close to him, just like me. You must be dying of curiosity to see how he is now. Elena forced a light smile, without denying or confirming. Yeah, curiosity is one word. Bonnie huffed lightly, but said nothing. Inside, she felt the same tightness as Elena, that mix of anxiety, nostalgia, and the strangeness that both had tried to bury during the year following Ryan's departure. I mean, she couldn't look into both their eyes for a while. Caroline, noticing the silence of the two, tilted her head with a suspicious look. Okay, what's up? Why the funeral faces? Aren't you happy he's back? It's not that, Elena responded quickly, maybe too quickly. Just, it's weird, it's been a long time. Bonnie nodded, as if wanting to end the subject. Yeah, too long. But both knew the problem wasn't the time. It was the memory of that night, a confusing night, marked by drunken laughs, unspoken promises, and feelings that none of them had the courage to revisit after Ryan left. Now he was back, and neither of them had any idea how to deal with it. Caroline, who until then seemed just excited, let out a sigh. She looked from one to the other and, for a moment, her expression changed. The excited smile gave way to something more serious, almost vulnerable. Okay, I'm going to be honest, she said, fiddling with the strap of her bag on her shoulder. I also felt kind of weird when I saw him. I mean, you can't deny we had that whole thing, remember? But that was years ago. It was, I don't know, teenage stuff. We three were teenagers. Elena and Bonnie exchanged a quick look, surprised by their friend's honesty. Caroline shrugged, trying to keep the tone light, but still with a hint of melancholy. Things are different now. We are different. We've been through so much in these last years that, you can't go back in time and pretend everything is the same. Bonnie took a deep breath, agreeing with a subtle nod. Yeah, you can't. Elena stayed silent for a moment, absorbing those words. Part of her felt relieved, hearing Caroline admit that broke a bit of the strange atmosphere in the air. But at the same time, it only reinforced that Ryan wasn't just any memory. He was part of a past that still had loose threads between them. Caroline, noticing the silence, tried to compose herself. She straightened her posture, opened a forced smile, and spoke with more energy. But look, whatever it is, he's here again. And we're going to have to deal with it one way or another. So, how about we pretend it's just another normal school day? Bonnie let out a short, almost ironic giggle. Normalcy never lasts long in Mystic Falls. Elena couldn't help but smile too, even with the tightness in her chest. Yeah, it never lasts. I still think this is great news. Caroline then gave one last look at the two and, with her charming smile, said, "Well, I'm off, girls. See you later." She winked, giving a wave to the two, and walked away hurriedly. Bonnie and Elena just smiled at each other before grabbing their books for class from the locker. It was in the midst of these conversations that Elena noticed Jeremy entering the bathroom with a strange walk, visibly high. An irritated sigh escaped her lips as she decided to go after him, with Bonnie wishing her luck. She pushed the bathroom door and, upon seeing him balancing on the sink, started to scold him. Jeremy, with a disdainful smile, cut her off quickly, calling her crazy and dismissing her words. This made Elena even more irritated, and her patience was tested to the limit. She looked at him angrily and grabbed his face, giving him one last sermon, feeling a mix of frustration and concern for his lack of respect. Angrily, she decided to leave the bathroom, preferring not to waste another second on him. As she left hurriedly, she almost bumped into someone in the hallway. Upon lifting her eyes, she found a new face, a tall guy, with dark and messy hair, and eyes of a deep and penetrating tone. His face is immaculate, with striking features, like a strong jawline and well-defined traits, that make him seem almost supernatural in perfection. He wears simple clothes, but with an elegant and sober touch, opting for a long-sleeved shirt, jacket, and dark jeans. His posture is erect, with an air of control, as if he were always vigilant and pondering his actions. His presence, at the same time mysterious and imposing, makes him stand out in the environment, even without trying. Elena quickly apologized before leaving. With her mind still occupied with the events from moments before, she and Bonnie quickly headed to history class, a bit distracted, but still immersed in their own concerns. Chapter 5: Reunion with Old Friends. Without knowing about the meeting of his childhood friends and the heated discussion about him, Ryan left the principal's office in silence. He had gone there just to handle some formalities before classes, nothing major, just a bureaucratic detail about his transfer. The hallway was full of voices and hurried footsteps, but he seemed oblivious to everything. Some glances followed him, mainly from girls who whispered among themselves, but he remained indifferent. None of them had anything that caught his attention. He turned left, finding the hallway where the history classroom was. Ryan stopped upon noticing two girls walking from the other end of the hallway while talking. For an instant, everything vanished. He blinked and, in their place, saw two children laughing in the backyard on a hot summer afternoon. Then, teenagers, sharing a cheap bottle on some late night, hiding secrets behind complicit glances. It was a distant memory, but clear enough to tighten some forgotten corner inside him. When he blinked again, the images faded away. They were no longer memories. They were realities. Bonnie and Elena were in front of him. Ryan blinked slowly, letting his gaze sweep over the two without haste. His face remained impassive, but a small curve appeared on his lips after a moment as he walked toward the two. Ignoring the other students, he approached saying, "I can't believe it. Bonnie, Elena." The two stopped immediately, as if time had frozen. First it was Elena who lifted her face, her eyes wide. Her laughter interrupted mid-sentence when her eyes met the figure walking toward her in the hallway. Ryan, her voice came out almost in shock, but with an immediate gleam of recognition. Bonnie turned too, taking half a second longer. For an instant, she felt her heart stop. She saw the exact moment when his eyes landed on her and Elena. Was it really Ryan? While she realized she was holding her breath. And she didn't know if it was from the surprise of the reunion or from the simple fact that, damn, Caroline was absolutely right. He had become hot as fuck. "I can't believe it," Bonnie almost shouted, before running the final steps and throwing herself against him in a tight hug. "My God, look at you. Caroline had said you had come back, but only seeing it with my own eyes made it sink in. Bonnie, Ryan said, his deep and calm voice sounding almost like a living memory. It's good to see you again too. Her heart beat hard. His scent, the warmth, everything pulled her toward memories she preferred to keep buried. Because it wasn't just friendship. It never was. She remembered the last night together, when the drinks and mixed feelings led them to cross all lines. A chaotic, intense night, where she, Elena, and even Caroline got lost with Ryan in the same room. Drunken laughter, kisses that started as a joke and became something much heavier, much more intimate. Bonnie swallowed hard as she pulled away, her wide smile disguising any trace of that memory. My God, you have no idea how much you've been missed, she said, keeping her voice light. Meanwhile, Elena remained still, frozen. When she saw him, for a moment, gravity simply ceased to exist. The ground vanished under her feet. The hallway around dissolved into blurred spots of movement and sound. Nothing mattered. There was no noise from students, no doors slamming, no voices echoing. Only he remained. Ryan. It was as if the entire universe had held its breath along with her. His green eyes, intense and impossible to ignore, met hers. And Elena felt a shiver run down her spine, the kind of chill that starts in the stomach and explodes through the entire body. He was just like the memories she kept so fondly, but at the same time completely different. The boy who ran with her through the backyards and invented stories under the sunset had disappeared. In front of her now was a man, taller, stronger, with an almost dangerous presence. And handsome, ridiculously handsome, the kind that made any girl lose her breath, even if for a second. And it was in that instant that she knew, Caroline was right. He didn't just grow up. He transformed into a handsome man. Elena blinked a few times, trying to regain control of herself. But when he pulled away from Bonnie's hug and his green eyes met hers again, loaded with a silent recognition, as if he were reliving all the memories with her, Elena felt her heart race out of control. Without thinking twice, she moved. The steps were quick, almost desperate. Before she could even question herself, she was already wrapping him in her arms. Her body pressed against his with force, as if she wanted to make sure he was real, that he wasn't just a memory distorted by longing. Ryan stiffened for a second, surprised. But soon relaxed, returning the hug. Elena closed her eyes, because she remembered too. The taste of alcohol mixed with laughter, the feeling of losing control, the moment when the three, four if you included Caroline, let themselves be carried away by something that never should have happened. And yet, it had happened. She pushed the memory away, burying it forcefully, but the silent shame was still there, in the depths of her eyes. Quickly she released the hug, even against her own will. When their eyes met again, Elena realized she was smiling without even noticing. Welcome back, Ryan. Her voice came out soft, but loaded with something more. He held her gaze, then Bonnie's, and a calm smile formed on his lips. It's good to be back, he replied, serene, but with a silent weight in the words. Time passed too quickly. So, about that, it was 3 years, Bonnie said, crossing her arms, her voice carrying a slightly accusatory tone. Ryan raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Guilty. But, to be fair, I tried to keep in touch. Elena snorted. Trying doesn't mean disappearing for months on end and then showing up out of nowhere with a, "Hi, how are things?" Before he could respond, a student hurried past in the hallway, lightly bumping into Elena. She stumbled, but Ryan quickly grabbed her by the arm, keeping her steady. Are you okay? He asked, his voice calm, but with that protective tone that always made her shiver. Yes, thanks, Elena replied, still a bit dazed. Bonnie rolled her eyes, crossing her arms with that air of someone who didn't want to admit her heart was racing. These hallways are impossible. You can't have a civilized conversation without being interrupted. Ryan smiled sideways, leaning slightly against the hallway wall, leaving space for the two to lean as well. So, let's use this wall as strategic protection against invading students. Elena sighed, leaning against the wall next to him, her body still a bit tense, but clearly calming down with Ryan's presence. Seems like a good idea. That way we won't get run over every 5 seconds. After finding a better corner to talk, they continued their conversation about Ryan's total disappearance. Unfortunately I had little time to send messages. Ryan continued saying what he would have said if he hadn't been interrupted before. Almost everything in my life changed after going to Japan. I didn't have time for anything. Elena arched an eyebrow, trying to hide the immediate curiosity that sprouted. How was it there? Ryan nodded. I studied, worked, tried to find myself there. In a way, it worked. Bonnie arched an eyebrow, her arms already crossing in an almost automatic reflex. Her gaze pierced his with an intensity that mixed irony and a hint of hurt. It worked for you, huh? Because from here it didn't seem like anything was working. It seemed more like 3 years of ghosting. Ryan arched an eyebrow, the corner of his lips curving into a contained smile. Ah, so that's it. Bonnie, du haltst mir immer noch einen Groll. Bonnie, you still hold a grudge, he said in German, the pronunciation clear and confident. Bonnie blinked, surprised. What was that? You speak German now? Of course, Ryan replied naturally, keeping his green eyes fixed on her. And, to be honest, I think I deserve one. Bitte vergib mir, please forgive me. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hold back the smile. You're impossible, speaking German now to get out of it. 3 years gone, no explanations, and I just show up again. I figure a plea for forgiveness in German increases my chances of absolution. On the other hand, Elena, who was silent, interrupted with surprise. Wait, since when do you speak German, Ryan? She said, the surprise breaking any formality she was trying to maintain. Ryan let out a low laugh, amused by her reaction, but without losing his charm. Ah, that, I learned during my stay in Japan. He arched an eyebrow. It's not common, I know. But I needed to challenge myself somehow. And, of course, keep my apology cards interesting. In truth, he had learned it in his past life from an army friend who knew several languages, but no one needed to know that. Elena blinked, still incredulous, crossing her arms. Interesting. You're telling me you spent 3 years away, and the first thing you learned was German. Ryan shrugged, with an air of calm arrogance that always left her frustrated. Well, I needed something dramatic. And let's face it, a plea for forgiveness in German has another weight, don't you think? Bonnie snorted, but couldn't hold back the smile that escaped. You're impossible, but effective, he retorted, with that half-smile that always left her irritatingly enchanted. So, are you going to forgive me, or do I have to try in Französisch French too? I would ask you since when you also know French, but I think it's better not to ask. Elena let out a low laugh, shaking her head. If he starts switching languages all the time, Bonnie, I think he'll end up confusing you even more. Bonnie snorted, crossing her arms, but her heart was racing. Okay, I forgive you, Ryan. But only because you finally deigned to show up and explain something. Ryan winked, satisfied. Then we're even, for now. Before he or Bonnie could continue their conversation, Elena interrupted and asked with curiosity. Besides English, Japanese, German, and French, what else did you learn in your time in Japan? Let me see. Ryan pondered as he said, I'm fluent in English, Japanese, German, French, Russian, Bulgarian, Italian, Greek, and Mandarin. I also speak a little Korean. Wait, you speak all these languages? Bonnie asked, surprised. The same surprise that was stamped on Elena's face. Exactly. Ryan winked, the smile maintaining that confident air that always left her flustered. All of them except Korean, which I speak very little, nothing perfect, but enough to hold a conversation. It's useful in some situations. Bonnie crossed her arms, feigning disapproval, but the smile escaped. Wow, so you specialized in confusing girls with multilingual charm, huh? Look at that, Ryan, the polyglot. That's fancy. I bet besides speaking all these languages now you also know how to fight like those movie guys, right? Ryan lied blatantly. Kendo, some martial arts. I needed to occupy my mind, keep my body in motion. It became routine. Elena widened her eyes slightly, biting her lower lip without noticing. That explains a lot. Ryan arched an eyebrow, curious. A lot of what? Your build, she said too quickly, averting her gaze with her cheeks slightly flushed. You can tell you've changed. Bonnie, noticing her friend's embarrassment, didn't miss the chance. Translating, you became hot as fuck, and she's trying to be polite. Bonnie, Elena exclaimed, nudging her friend in the arm, her face flushed. Ryan laughed again, but this time the sound came with a playful gleam in his green eyes. Well, I guess I can't complain about the compliment, even if indirect. Elena sighed, shaking her head, but a smile escaped anyway. Ryan kept the smile, tilting his head slightly, his green eyes shining with contained mischief. "But you know what?" he said, his voice low, full of an almost provocative charm. "I wasn't the only one who changed in these 3 years, you two became hot too." The comment made the two freeze for an instant. Bonnie blinked a few times, her heart racing, and Elena felt a heat rise up her neck and cheeks, immediately remembering that chaotic and intense night that they could never erase. Bonnie snorted, averting her gaze, trying to disguise the blush rising on her face. Elena, on the other hand, bit her lip, his green eyes piercing through every layer of memory she tried to bury. "Ryan," she murmured, not knowing whether to laugh, get nervous, or remember. The hallway fell silent for an instant, loaded with tension and memories that only they shared. But the shrill sound of the class bell cut through that moment like a knife. The ring echoed through the hallway, cold and insistent, reminding them that, despite the chemistry and memories, reality still existed. "Ah, damn," Bonnie murmured, averting her gaze, still flushed, while her heart tried to calm down. "Class, we need to go in." Elena sighed, letting out a light nervous laugh. "Always the wrong moment, huh? It seems like a joke." Ryan furrowed his brow slightly, but the smile didn't disappear. He looked at the two, still leaning against the wall, as if he wanted to absorb a few more seconds before giving into the routine. Right, he said, raising his hand to his hair, running his fingers through the strands distractedly. "We'll survive school, right? Just a few more hours of torture and we're free. Shall we?" he said finally. Bonnie and Elena nodded almost in unison, and the three began walking down the hallway, mixed in with the crowd of students. Chapter 6: Amoral Thoughts. The classroom was already half full when they entered. The voices fell silent for a few seconds, as if someone had pressed the pause button. It wasn't hard to notice the reason. Every gaze seemed to be sucked towards Ryan, all the students looked at him, as if his presence filled every corner of the place. Some girls exchanged quick glances and laughed softly, others simply stared at him without any disguise. Even some guys furrowed their brows, uncertain between surprise and discomfort. Elena felt the tension in the air, but pretended to be natural. Bonnie, on the other hand, lifted her chin with that expression she used when she didn't want anyone to notice that she was also a bit bothered. "Looks like you've already got a whole audience," Bonnie murmured, softly, "just for him." Ryan smiled sideways, as if that didn't affect him at all. "It's not my fault if the school isn't used to receiving new students." After whispering that to Bonnie, he walked to one of the desks further ahead, choosing his seat without hurry, as if he were completely oblivious to the gazes that still followed him. He sat down calmly, adjusting himself in the chair, while some nearby students quickly averted their eyes, trying to disguise their curiosity. Elena and Bonnie continued walking to the back of the classroom, finding two empty desks side by side in a more distant row. Bonnie left her backpack on the chair first, occupying the spot next to the wall, and Elena settled right behind the row where Ryan had sat, resting her books on the desk. The atmosphere seemed to have returned to normal, with conversations resuming in low murmurs and muffled laughter. Well, Ryan wasn't the only new student the school had received this year. In a corner of the classroom, another, new student, observed Elena in silence. Earlier, he had found her in the bathroom, at the moment she was giving a lecture to her younger brother for using drugs. Now, his eyes remained fixed on her, even though Elena didn't give him the slightest attention. He knew that, under other circumstances, perhaps she would be more receptive to his presence. But there was no way to compete with the boy with black hair and green eyes who monopolized her gaze. That situation made him uncomfortable. Who was that boy? When he researched Elena's life, he found nothing about him. Well, maybe he was just a new student, or perhaps an old friend who had studied abroad and now decided to return to Mystic Falls. When the bell rang, the students began to settle into their seats. The classroom soon filled with low laughter and whispers. Some still took the opportunity to exchange quick words with friends before class started. The door opened and Professor Tanner entered. Tall, with curly black hair and brown eyes, he had an athletic build and a firm presence. "Good morning, class," he said with a clear voice. "Good morning, Professor," the class responded in chorus. Tanner placed some papers on the desk, adjusted his glasses, and turned to the board. "Today we're going to talk about the history of Virginia during the Civil War. He began, scribbling with white chalk while explaining. He spoke about the conflict, about how Virginia joined the Confederacy in 1861, and how that led to divisions until resulting in the creation of West Virginia in 1863. Then, he moved on to the Battle of Gettysburg. But for some, the explanation sounded distant, almost like a hum. Elena couldn't take her eyes off Ryan. He, in turn, turned slightly and looked at her over his shoulder. For a moment, their gazes met. A discreet smile appeared on his lips, a smile that seemed to understand everything without needing words. Elena's heart raced. It was as if butterflies had stirred in her stomach, too light to ignore. She tried to force her eyes back to the board, but the image of Ryan's smile was already etched in her mind. Bonnie also observed him in silence. She pretended to jot something in her notebook, but her eyes insisted on returning to Ryan. She gripped the pen tightly, trying to disguise the sudden wave of heat she felt. Behind her, Matt noticed that silent exchange immediately. His expression closed, and a discomfort crossed his chest. Seeing Elena look at Ryan that way awakened a jealousy he wasn't prepared to feel. He tried to focus on the professor's voice, but the scene replayed in his mind. And so the class continued, with each one trapped in their own thoughts. The clock seemed to drag until finally the bell for the end of the next class rang. The math teacher left the room, gathering her papers with a sigh, and most of the students let out a chorus of relief. Notebooks were closed and the typical interval movement began to take over the hallway. "Thank God," Bonnie murmured, resting her head on her arms. "If I had to hear one more explanation about quadratic functions, I swear I would turn into a graph myself and disappear." Elena laughed softly, putting away her things. "It wasn't that bad." "Easy for you to say, who understands it right away?" Bonnie retorted, without lifting her face. Ryan stretched as he approached the two, looked at both with a light smile, and asked, "How about we forget math for a while? I'll buy something for you in the cafeteria. Consider it an official apology for disappearing for years." Elena raised her eyebrows, surprised. "You don't need to do that, Ryan." "I do," he insisted, with that light tone, but one that left no room for refusal. "The truth is, I really wanted to take you to some decent restaurant, one of those with a menu in French and dishes we don't even know how to pronounce right. But, since we're stuck at school, I think the cafeteria will have to do." Bonnie stared at him with that characteristic look of distrust, but the corner of her mouth betrayed the start of a smile. "French restaurant? You've barely returned and you're already trying to flirt with both of us." "I wouldn't be a real man if I didn't try, right?" he replied, with a voice loaded with humor, "but you can think it's just a friend trying to redeem himself." "Ah, sure, just a friend trying to redeem himself," Elena repeated, with a playful tone, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. A sudden warmth ran through her chest, memories of laughter, jokes, and even more intimate moments with Ryan flashing in her mind. Bonnie, on the other hand, tried to look away, but couldn't. Her green eyes followed him with every movement, and an involuntary smile escaped when he approached. A wave of emotion mixed with irritation and desire ran through her body. She wanted to suppress it, but at the same time she loved that sensation, that familiarity loaded with tension. "You really don't waste time, do you?" In the end, she murmured, the corners of her mouth lifting, trying to sound serious, but the tone betrayed a mix of amusement and something she didn't want to admit even to herself. Ryan shrugged, that mischievous half-smile that always left her irritated and enchanted at the same time. "What can I say? Old habits never die." Elena ended up giving in, shaking her head, but with a playful gleam in her eyes. "All right, but only because school cafeteria isn't usually as glamorous as you're promising." "Deal," Ryan replied, satisfied. "Come on, before the good options run out." The trio left together, crossing the already crowded hallway of students coming and going. As they walked, Elena and Bonnie exchanged discreet glances, each processing the mix of desire, longing, and something more complicated that they felt for him. Ryan seemed to notice, maintaining that perfect balance between provocation and affection, joking about the time they spent apart and everything that had been left unsaid, or undone. The noise increased with every step until they reached the cafeteria. The double doors opened, revealing a spacious area, lit by large windows. Long tables occupied the center, full of noisy groups. The smell of freshly baked pizza mixed with that of French fries, and the constant sound of trays being banged on the counter gave a sense of organized chaos. There was everything: pizzas, sandwiches, simple salads, hot dishes with pasta or breaded chicken, plus shelves full of juices, sodas, and small packages of snacks. Ryan went straight to the line, with Elena and Bonnie beside him. When it was his turn, he didn't waste time. He grabbed a tray with a slice of pizza, a turkey sandwich, 2 bottles of orange juice, and some extra French fries. "All right," he said, handing 1 bottle of juice to Elena and another to Bonnie. "It's not a French restaurant, but I hope it serves." "It does," Elena replied, laughing, taking her share. Bonnie took the other bottle and looked at him with an arched eyebrow. "At least you didn't offer us a bit of vodka this time." "Unfortunately, they don't sell that here in the cafeteria," Ryan said, shrugging. As he spoke, he noticed that both their gazes became complicated because of Bonnie's comment. Of course, how could they not remember that night? A night that he, to his frustration, hadn't really lived, just carried as a memory. That bothered him. Still, the idea of reliving that experience, or better, conquering it a second time, crossed his mind. It would be harder now. After all, the 3 were more mature and experienced women. But, if he had succeeded once, it wouldn't be impossible to do it again. So that was it. He wanted to take the 3 to bed. But, let's face it, if any man were in his place, wouldn't he want the same? He was honest at least in that point, so the answer could only be a resounding yes. What a stupid question. Would he be a scoundrel for ignoring feelings and thinking only about sex? Of course yes. But did he care about that? Not at all. In the end, he only worried about himself and no one else. I mean, why else would he be trying to get along with the 2? For friendship, please. Friendship between man and woman only truly exists if one of them is gay or if both find each other too ugly to try anything. It's the pure and simple truth. Speaking of truths, he had the powers of the King of Curses. He just needed time, a bit of training, and soon he would have absorbed all his power. Invincible. Absolutely invincible in this world. So, why the hell would he stay stuck in a small and boring town? The only reason was the convenience that his identity in the world had and, of course, the fact that he wanted to have fun with the 3 girls he saw in his memories. Besides, that town wasn't just fun. It was also a terrain full of future enemies that he wanted to defeat, eliminate, and collect like someone collects trophies. If it weren't by his own choice, he would have left the instant he was reborn. But staying there, he would remain. Because there, between convenience, pleasure, and the simple possibility of eliminating anyone who dared cross his path, life was too fun not to be enjoyed. He would do whatever he wanted, without restrictions, because now he held even more power than before. There were no more rules, no laws to contain him like in his old world. His philosophy of life, as distorted as it had always been, finally found fertile ground. Although his mind was full of thoughts like that, he showed nothing on his face that displayed a light smile after his comment, which was quickly met with a soft punch from Bonnie on his shoulder and a look from Elena. The 3 settled in a corner of the cafeteria, away from the central bustle, but still visible enough to observe the movement around. With Ryan sitting next to Elena and Bonnie in front of the 2. Bonnie took the sandwich and raised her eyebrow, biting the corner of her lip in a smile she didn't want to admit. "I see you still remember what I like to eat." Elena laughed softly, taking a slice of pizza and arranging it on the plate. "The same with me, cheese pizza and French fries. Nothing changed." Ryan settled in the chair, resting his arm on the back with a carefree air. A light smile appeared on his lips, but inside, he reflected with certain irony, his identity in that world was simply perfect. Not only did he possess the same personality and the same tastes as before, but he also carried a genius mind, capable of remembering everything with absolute clarity. Even something as useless as this that he would have forgotten after about 3 months. He didn't let any of his thoughts show. He just tilted his head slightly, as if it were natural. "Some things you can't forget. You 2 have an enviable consistency." Bonnie laughed, shaking her head. "Consistency? I think you meant predictable." "No," Ryan replied. "I meant that you know what you want. There are people who change tastes every season. But not you. That always caught my attention. Oh, and it also helped me remember more easily." Elena, biting the pizza, looked away, but the soft smile that appeared made it clear that the words moved her. Bonnie pretended to roll her eyes, but the warmth in her expression also gave her away. They started eating, and soon the conversation flowed naturally, as if the years of distance hadn't existed. Ryan asked about the school news, and Elena was the first to respond. She talked about the changes, the new teachers, and how the football team had lost badly in last year's championship. Since her parents had died the previous summer, she felt empty and completely lost. But, with the arrival of the boy accompanying her, that feeling began to disappear. She spoke animatedly, gesturing lightly, while Ryan listened attentively, displaying that half smile that seemed to see much more than her words revealed. Bonnie joined the conversation right after, remembering funny episodes, like the time Caroline tried to organize a surprise party but forgot to tell the birthday person. The three laughed together, and for a moment it seemed like nothing had changed, that they were still just teenagers having fun without worries. When the topic shifted to Ryan's life in Japan, he answered a few questions casually, not giving much weight to the details. He shared just enough to satisfy everyone's curiosity, but didn't linger on the subject. Soon after, he steered the conversation towards something lighter, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, making it clear he didn't want his personal life to become the center of attention. By the way, did you know that in Japan people really eat rice even for breakfast? I almost died missing a simple bread with butter. Elena widened her eyes, laughing. Seriously, I can't imagine breakfast without bread. That's right, Ryan replied, laughing too. And not only that, you ask for water in a restaurant and they bring you hot tea. In the summer, I almost had a syncope the first time. Bonnie burst out laughing, shaking her head. I can imagine your indignant face. It was exactly that, pure indignation. The table filled with laughter again, and so they stayed, exchanging stories, memories, and provocations. Ryan let slip small observations about the time away. Elena and Bonnie responded with their own local stories, and gradually what happened in the past gave way to the lightness of simply being together again. _AN. I just wanted to make something clear. Ryan is basically the opposite of Renzu. Renzu started out human, full of flaws but still with feelings, and over time he matured into what I'd call a villain. Ryan, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. He starts as a pure sociopath, cold, with a twisted philosophy like Sukuna, and absolutely no empathy. The difference is that Ryan isn't going to sink deeper into that side, he's going to take the reverse path. Over time, instead of losing his humanity like Renzu, he's going to start finding it. He'll mature by learning what it means to care, to feel, and to carry something beyond just himself. In the end, they're two extremes walking in opposite directions, Renzu going from human to villain, and Ryan going from sociopath to someone more human. Anyway, I want to cook up something cool with this. So, look forward to it. Chapter 7 Jealousy. It didn't take long for the three to be interrupted. Caroline approached with a tray in hand and impeccable posture as always. She had already seen Ryan earlier, but now, upon finding him sitting in a corner with Elena and Bonnie, she felt a slight discomfort, that kind of tightness in the chest that she hated to admit. But look at that, Caroline approached with a forced smile and eyes shining on purpose. You three looking like an exclusive little club and didn't even bother to call me. Elena looked up, a bit surprised. Caroline, it's not quite like that, we just nothing. Caroline pulled a chair without asking permission and sat down, placing the tray on the table. There was a carefully assembled salad, a diet soda, and, of course, a strategically placed cupcake. I feel personally offended, okay. Childhood best friend disappears for years, reappears suddenly, and you two kidnap him without warning me. Bonnie raised an eyebrow. Kidnap? That was an exaggeration. I think he's not a trophy you can steal. Maybe he is, Caroline replied without thinking, tossing her hair to the side in that characteristic way, an international trophy. Came straight from Japan, limited edition. Ryan let out a low laugh, bringing the juice to his lips. I don't know if I like that comparison. Ah, you should feel flattered. Caroline leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand and staring at him without disguise. Not everyone comes back to Mystic Falls causing collective commotion on the first day. Elena looked away, stirring her plate, trying to hide the discomfort. Bonnie pretended to drink her juice, but her eyes followed Caroline attentively. Ryan, in turn, maintained his usual amusement. I was just catching up with them. Caroline smiled, but the jealousy was still there, hidden behind the shine in her gaze. Catching up, or reminiscing about certain nights that no one ever forgot. Elena froze for a second, the fork stopped in the air. Bonnie pressed her lips, her gaze hardening before looking away to the sandwich. The tension became evident, even if no one had the courage to admit it out loud. Ryan leaned slightly back, a half-smile appearing on his lips. Well, some memories deserve to be revisited, don't you think? Caroline blinked slowly, victorious for provoking the reaction she wanted. I think so. Elena took a deep breath, finally raising her eyes. Caroline, don't start. What? Caroline made her voice sound innocent. I'm just joining the conversation. It's not like I was the last to know, right? Bonnie rolled her eyes, but said nothing. Ryan just kept that enigmatic smile, letting the silence linger for a few seconds longer than necessary. It was almost cruel, as if he wanted to see how far each of them would go or react regarding this subject. Everyone at that table knew in some way that they would have to address this subject sooner or later, since. Caroline drummed her fingers on the table, satisfied for having poked where she knew it hurt, but deep down, she also felt her own chest tighten with the memory. Elena kept the fork still, her eyes fixed on the plate, trying to compose herself. Bonnie, impatient, was the first to break the mood. You two can laugh and tease as much as you want, she said, with a firm voice, but unable to hide the slight blush on her cheeks, but no one here is going to pretend that that night wasn't complicated. Caroline arched an eyebrow. Complicated? It was intense. There's a difference. Elena sighed, finally dropping the fork. Intense, confusing, embarrassing, call it what you want. But we all promised it was better to forget. We had a weird year after it back then. I don't want us to have another year like that. We're seniors now and we're not teenagers anymore. Promising is easy, Caroline retorted, raising her chin. Forgetting, that's another story. Ryan rested his elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers, his gaze wandering from one to the other calmly and with a slight ironic smile. Maybe you're overthinking it. It was one night, a memory, nothing more. Elena stared at him, surprised by the coldness of the response, but at the same time relieved that he was trying to downplay the mood caused by the subject. Bonnie let out a brief ironic laugh. You talk like it had no importance at all. Ryan shrugged. It has the importance you want to give it. I, personally, don't usually live in the past. The phrase hung in the air like a sharp knife, cutting part of the tension. Caroline pressed her lips, almost annoyed, while Elena relaxed her shoulders a bit. Bonnie just shook her head, accepting the cue to end the subject. Right, Elena murmured, trying to sound light, so let's talk about something else. Good idea. Caroline forced a smile. Although she was guilty of bringing up this subject, it was just her impulsive side speaking. She pulled the cupcake closer and continued. After all, we have a Tokyo boy back in town and I still haven't asked about his international scandals. Ryan laughed low, the change of subject serving as relief. Scandals? I was studying and working most of the time, Caroline. There's nothing glamorous about that. Ah, please, she rolled her eyes, biting a piece of the sweet. You could be in a moldy library and still manage to stir up a scandal. Elena laughed unintentionally, and Bonnie sighed, but the mood around the table was already lighter. The tension from the memory still lingered, since it was hard to forget, but no one seemed willing to resurrect it again, at least not at that moment. The group continued talking, trying to keep the tone light. Caroline didn't stop firing questions about Ryan's life in Japan, each one more invasive, while Bonnie and Elena limited themselves to laughing or sighing, as if they were used to the blonde's exaggerated curiosity. So you didn't meet any exotic model? Caroline insisted, poking with the plastic spoon. No mysterious artist? No billionaire heiress who wanted to marry you? Ryan raised an eyebrow, the smile still at the corner of his lips. No, Caroline, none of that. Tisk, you're terrible at gossip. She huffed, but her eyes still shone with mischief. Bonnie laughed lightly. Or maybe he just isn't obligated to tell everything. Ah, please, Caroline retorted quickly, resting her elbows on the table and leaning closer. This is Ryan, since he was little, always surrounded by attention. It's almost a Mystic Falls tradition. She made a dramatic pause and looked at Elena, the tone becoming slightly competitive. Remember, even in the worst moments, he was always the boy who drew attention. Elena raised her eyes, confused. What do you mean? Caroline shrugged, trying to seem casual, but her tongue ran faster than her brain. I mean, even after your parents' accident at the beginning of summer and now with the return to classes when everyone was watching you, he still managed to be the only one capable of distracting people from that tragedy because of how hot he got. Inevitable. The silence fell heavy on the table. Elena froze, the smile disappearing instantly. Bonnie blinked slowly, surprised and indignant. Caroline. Bonnie spoke in a low but firm tone, reprimanding her. Seriously, you didn't need to bring that up now. The blonde blinked several times, as if only then realizing the gravity of what she had said. I didn't mean, it wasn't in that sense, she tried to correct herself, nervous. I just meant that Ryan always had this way of shifting focus, you know. But she was soon interrupted in the middle of her words. Ryan looked at Elena, noticing how her face had lost color. He didn't say anything right away. He just extended his hand slowly, touched Elena's shoulder carefully, and when she raised her confused eyes, he pulled her into a firm hug. Elena felt the world spin. Her heart raced, his scent enveloped her, and for a moment she forgot where she was. There was only the memory of how it felt to be protected, loved, even if just for that brief moment. I'm so sorry, Elena. Ryan murmured against her hair, his voice laden with sincerity, really. I didn't know. Now I regret not being here when it all happened, but if I had, I would have done anything so you wouldn't go through it alone. She closed her eyes, trying not to get lost in the wave of emotions. Caroline, who before was in panic, now watched the scene with a pang of regret and, mainly, throbbing jealousy. Bonnie, on the other hand, kept her face impassive, but the way she gripped the cup in her hands betrayed the discomfort. I'm fine, thank you. Don't blame yourself for that. You didn't know, Ryan. Elena murmured finally, slowly undoing the hug, even though she still wanted to stay there. She took a deep breath, trying to compose her tone of voice, and cast a firm look at Caroline. Really? Caroline swallowed hard, lowering her eyes before forcing a light smile. Sorry, Elena, I let it slip. It was lack of filter, as always. I shouldn't have said it. Elena nodded, offering a soft smile back. I know, Care. The bell echoed loudly through the hallways, ending any chance of prolonging the conversation. The cafeteria began to bustle, voices and footsteps filling the environment as the students hurriedly collected their trays. Ryan let out a low sigh, adjusting himself in the chair with his usual calm. Elena still maintained a serene semblance, although her eyes betrayed that the memory poked by Caroline still hurt her. Bonnie, in turn, collected the folded napkin and pushed her chair back. Better we go, she said, standing up first. The next class won't wait. Elena nodded slowly. Before standing up, she quickly looked at Caroline, who continued with the cupcake in front of her, now untouched. The blonde forced a small smile, but it was easy to see the discomfort in her eyes. Ryan was the last to move. His gaze lingered a second longer on Caroline, who pretended to adjust the napkin just to not look at anyone directly. See you later, Care, he said in a casual tone, with that enigmatic half-smile that left in the air whether it was kindness or provocation. Caroline raised her eyes and responded with a quick nod, the knot in her throat betraying that, behind the confident facade, she was ruminating every word she had let slip. Elena and Bonnie followed alongside Ryan toward the exit. Caroline stayed behind, watching the trio walk away. Her chest tightened in a strange way, a mix of regret and resentment. She wanted to run after them, explain herself, but her own stubbornness kept her glued to the chair. Deep down, she knew she didn't like feeling excluded and even less perceiving that, unintentionally, she had hurt Elena. As the cafeteria door closed behind the three, Caroline sighed, resting her chin on her hand. Congratulations, Caroline, she murmured softly to herself. Always talking too much. The hallway was full of voices and footsteps mixed with the sound of lockers being slammed. Ryan walked between Elena and Bonnie. The three continued together to the classroom. When they crossed the door, all eyes turned to them immediately. Matt frowned, unable to hide the pang of discomfort that crossed his chest. Earlier, he had considered calling Ryan to join him and Tyler during the break. It would be the right thing to do, after all they were trying to include the new boy in the group. But, before he had the courage to open his mouth, he saw Ryan approaching Bonnie and Elena naturally, and in that instant, he gave up. The feelings that had already arisen in class, when he noticed Elena looking away to another boy, only deepened. Now, seeing them returning together to the room, side by side, provoked in him an immediate, almost suffocating discomfort. It was as if something tightened his throat. Elena wasn't just an ex. She was his first love, someone for whom he still harbored feelings, even if he tried to hide or pretend he had gotten over it. Seeing her smiling at Ryan awakened a bitter mix of jealousy and insecurity. Tyler would probably mock him, say he was exaggerating and needed to move on. But for Matt it wasn't that simple. Elena had been part of his life forever, and watching another guy approach her so easily was like reopening a wound that had never healed properly. He took a deep breath, trying to disguise it. He had no right to complain, he knew that. Still, he couldn't stop the question hammering in his mind: how should he feel about that? But Matt wasn't the only one taken by conflicting feelings. The other new student, seated at the last desk near the window, remained silent, observing. His gaze wasn't just curious, there was something intense, almost too loaded for someone who barely knew those faces. Seeing Elena so close to Ryan, this old friend, who to him was a complete stranger, awakened a discomfort he didn't even know how to name. A discomfort that went beyond simple jealousy. Ryan, in turn, gradually interrupted the conversation with Bonnie and Elena, as if nothing had happened, and proceeded to his desk in front. With tranquility, he adjusted his books, taking the seat without showing anything. Elena took a deep breath before sitting a bit behind him, in her usual place, while Bonnie settled beside her. The buzz in the room gradually resumed, but the tension in the air didn't disappear completely. Chapter 8. I'll give you a ride, want it? The clock on the wall ticked the minutes slowly, and the monotonous voice of the physics teacher filled the air like a constant hum. Most of the students struggled to stay focused, but Ryan seemed strangely concentrated, his gaze fixed on his notes and his body relaxed in the chair. Bonnie tried to stay attentive, but her mind wandered. From time to time, she cast short glances toward Ryan, observing the way he handled everything, the tranquility, the natural way he fit in, as if he had never left. It was irritating and at the same time, comforting. Elena forced herself to focus on the board, but the sound of low laughter behind her and the constant murmur of her classmates made her drift into distant thoughts. What Caroline had said still echoed in her mind. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, the memory of the accident and Ryan's brief hug came back like flashes. Miss Gilbert. The teacher's voice pulled her out of her reverie. Elena blinked, quickly raising her gaze. Yes, can you repeat the last formula I just explained? She froze for a second. Before she could say anything, Ryan turned his body slightly, whispering almost inaudibly just for her to hear. Delta E equals mx squared. Elena breathed a sigh of relief and repeated aloud. Delta E equals mx squared. The teacher nodded, satisfied, and continued the explanation. Elena shot a quick glance at Ryan, who just smiled out of the corner of his mouth, turning back to his notebook as if nothing had happened. Bonnie, who saw the exchange, shook her head, holding back a discreet smile. Show off, she murmured softly, just to herself. The rest of the class dragged on at a slow pace until, finally, the familiar sound of the bell echoed through the hallways. Chairs scraping, papers being put away, and conversations mixed in a light chaos at the end of the period. Voices and laughter filled the room as the students hurried to leave. At that moment, Matt stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and started walking toward the exit. When he passed Ryan's desk, he stopped for an instant, an indecipherable expression appearing on his face. He approached the boy with Asian features and said, "Hey, man, sorry for not inviting you to lunch with me and Tyler earlier. I saw you were pretty engaged with Elena and Bonnie, and I didn't want to interrupt." Matt scratched the back of his neck, a bit awkward, before continuing. "Anyway, it was something I was going to tell you during break. You should try out for the football team, practice is tomorrow, after classes. Don't worry about it, Matt. I don't hold grudges." Ryan looked up, a slight smile appearing on his lips. "As for football, I'll check it out tomorrow." "Cool, then," Matt nodded, giving a small smile. "I think the coach will like seeing you play. If you're still the same as before, you'll quickly be the star of the team." He was about to continue speaking, but his gaze shifted for a moment to Elena, who was leaving her seat with Bonnie. The expression on his face changed to that mix of discomfort and reminiscence. Without saying anything else, he just waved quickly at Ryan and left the room. Ryan followed his friend with his gaze, but something on the other side caught his attention. The new student, the same one who had joined the class today just like him, stood up in silence. A boy with a calm gaze and almost impeccable posture. For a second, the two stared at each other. The boy gave a slight nod with his head, something respectful, discreet. Ryan returned the gesture with a short smile, almost imperceptible, his green eyes shining with a malicious emotion. And then he also stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Elena and Bonnie were already approaching, the two stopping beside him. "What did Matt want?" Bonnie asked, adjusting her hair while casting a curious glance toward the hallway. At that moment, only the three of them remained in the classroom, the distant sound of footsteps and laughter from the other students echoing through the now almost empty hallway. "Ah, nothing much," Ryan replied casually. "He told me to try out for the football team." Elena arched an eyebrow, surprised. "You playing football again? I thought you'd given up those things to be a model and all that." Ryan gave a light laugh. "I guess you can't lose the knack, right?" Bonnie, leaning against the desk beside him, crossed her arms and looked at him with an expression between skeptical and amused. Are you going to tell me now you want to play the popular athlete again?" "Me?" He raised his eyebrows, feigning offense. "I never stopped being popular." Bonnie let out a short laugh, shaking her head. 3 years away, and you still have the same irritating confidence." Ryan smiled out of the corner of his mouth. "It's good to know I still irritate you, Bonnie. It makes me feel at home." Elena watched the two with a light, but discreet smile. Bonnie shifted her gaze to Elena, and Ryan followed. "By the way," she said in a tone too casual not to seem planned, "Elena is still on the cheerleading squad." Ryan turned his gaze to the girl with brown eyes, his smile growing slowly. "Really? So if I join the team, I'll have you cheering for me?" Elena blinked, surprised, feeling her face heat up. I don't know, maybe. He tilted his head, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "I'll take a maybe. But it would be good to see you in that uniform again. Seriously, I think that would be the only good part of the games." Elena looked away for a moment, feeling her heart race. The way Ryan looked at her, that tranquil confidence, almost provocative, made the words seem to tangle on the tip of her tongue. She began, her voice coming out lower than intended. "After the accident, in the summer with my parents." The words stuck, even so long after, the simple act of mentioning it made her stomach tighten. Bonnie lowered her head slightly, her expression softening. Ryan, on the other hand, just kept his gaze on her, without interrupting, as if encouraging her to continue. Elena took a deep breath and forced a small smile. "I never stopped to think about going back to those things. The cheerleading squad, the parties, the gym, it seemed like all that had been left behind." There was a brief silence. The air in the room seemed lighter and, at the same time, heavier. Ryan leaned his body slightly forward, resting his weight on one hand on the desk. "But it would be good," she completed, glancing at him. "Maybe it would be good to try again." Ryan's smile grew, slow, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. "There it is," he said in a low tone, satisfied. "That sounds more like the Elena I knew." Bonnie let out a small sigh, the kind of sound that mixed exasperation and laughter. "You really don't change, do you?" Ryan raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "What now? You seem to still have that irritating gift of making people say what you want to hear." She looked at him with a half smile. "And the worst part is that it works." "Oh, that, I prefer to call it natural charisma," he replied with a shrug. Elena laughed, a bit awkwardly, trying to disguise the blush on her cheeks. Bonnie glanced at her sideways, noticing the detail. The tension hanging between the three was subtle, almost invisible to anyone looking from outside, but evident to those who were there. Ryan adjusted his backpack on his shoulder and looked toward the door. "Shall we? If we stay here one more minute, the janitor will think we're planning a nighttime invasion." Bonnie laughed. "With you involved, I wouldn't doubt it." He winked at her. "I'd call it a reconnaissance mission." Elena slung her backpack over her shoulder, still smiling. "Reconnaissance mission for what?" "For the new generation of Mystic Falls High," he replied, walking toward the door. "I have to see if the school spirit is still the same." Bonnie followed right behind. "You mean, see who still remembers you?" Ryan gave a low laugh, opening the door with a calm gesture. "I'd say that's a bonus." They stepped out into the illuminated hallway, now silent except for the distant sound of voices coming from the courtyard. The hallway was bathed in shades of gold and shadow when the three began to walk. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the old school walls and tinting everything with that warm, nostalgic glow typical of Mystic Falls. They passed through the double doors that led to the school courtyard. The evening air enveloped them immediately, fresh, with the distant smell of freshly cut grass. The three walked unhurriedly through the front courtyard toward the parking lot in front. The front school parking lot was already starting to empty, the engines of cars and the sound of teenage laughter echoing in the distance. Bonnie pulled her phone from her pocket, typing something quickly. Caroline wants to know if we're going to the grill later. She's putting together a group. Elena sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know if I'm in the mood to go out today. You're never in the mood, Bonnie retorted, with a light smile. That's why you need to go. A milkshake and a portion of fries can work wonders. Ryan put his hands in his pockets and watched them discuss, his tone soft, almost nostalgic. Does the Mystic Grill still exist? Elena looked at him, surprised. Of course it does. It's practically a city landmark. Then I think I'll show up there too. He shrugged, casual, it might be good to see some familiar faces. Bonnie raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? After all the drama of coming back and everything. Ryan laughed softly. Bonnie Bennett, still trying to protect me from my own decisions. She stared at him, amused. Someone has to do it. Relax, Bonnie, Elena interjected, smiling. Ryan has always known how to handle himself. True, he agreed, turning to her. And I promise to behave. More or less. Elena laughed, shaking her head. More or less is never a good sign coming from you. Then it's settled, Bonnie announced with a smile. 8 o'clock at the grill. And please, don't be late. Caroline will freak out if her welcome reunion plan doesn't work out. Ryan feigned a military salute. Yes, ma'am, Bonnie huffed, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a smile. While the two played, like in the old days, Elena felt the strange sensation of normalcy returning, the kind of moment that seemed too simple, but which, for some reason, was what she had missed the most. It hasn't changed much, he commented, sighing. When they reached the parking lot, the place was almost empty. Only a few cars remained, scattered among the long shadows of the evening. The light wind made Elena's hair move softly, and the distant sound of an engine echoed before ceasing completely. It was then that Bonnie stopped, her eyes widening slightly. Wait, are you serious? Elena followed her friend's gaze and there, next to Bonnie's car, was a black Nissan Skyline GTR R34, so shiny it looked like it had come straight out of a commercial. The paint reflected the golden sunset, and the elegant, aggressive lines of the car imposed presence. Ryan continued forward calmly, and the discreet sound of the metal keychain swinging in his hand confirmed what they were still processing. No, Elena whispered, frowning. Don't tell me this car is yours. Ryan cast a glance over his shoulder, a lazy smile forming on his lips. Why so surprised? Did you think I'd come to school on a bicycle? Bonnie blinked, incredulous. Ryan, that's a Skyline R34. This car is like a legend. He leaned lightly on the hood, as if it were a rare jewel. I like to keep traditions. My dad always said a man needs a good car and a convincing excuse to arrive late. Elena crossed her arms, trying to hold back her laughter. And what's your excuse? Ah, that's easy. He opened a provocative smile. I got stuck talking to two of the prettiest girls in Mystic Falls. Bonnie huffed, but couldn't hide her smile. Here he comes again with that cheap charm. Cheap. Ryan feigned indignation. This charm has already won me international awards. Elena arched an eyebrow, amused. Awards? Of course. Best casual smile. Category. Devastating. The two laughed, and the air between them seemed to lighten. Bonnie took a step forward and ran her hand over the hood of the car, examining the interior through the window. You really brought this to Mystic Falls. I thought you'd show up with an old Jeep or something like that. Jeep. Ryan let out a short laugh. Bonnie, I spent 3 years in Japan where I worked as a model. If there's one thing I learned there, it's that first impressions are everything. Elena approached, looking at the car with curiosity. So this is what happens when you have rich parents and good taste. Ryan winked. The good taste is my merit. The money, well, that's the least of the privileges. Bonnie glanced at him sideways. Ah, sure, humility has always been your trademark. Ryan looked at the two and a light smile formed on his face as he twirled the keychain on his fingers, the metallic sound echoing between them. So, he began, his voice calm, almost playful. I can offer a ride to you too. 3 hearts fit in the Skyline, I guarantee. Bonnie raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Thanks, but I have my own car. And it may not be a Skyline, but at least it doesn't look like it came out of a 2000s action movie. Ryan laughed. Typical of you, Bonnie. Always with the right comeback on the tip of your tongue. Someone has to keep your feet on the ground. He looked at Elena, who was silent. And you, Elena, want a ride home? I promise to drive slowly, more or less. Elena hesitated, her gaze going from Ryan to Bonnie. I don't know. I don't want to be a bother. And you just got back, you must have other things to do. Ryan approached a few steps, opening the passenger door with a theatrical gesture and an exaggerated bow. Miss Gilbert, the luxury transportation service of Mystic Falls is at your disposal. Consider it an honor to take you home. Elena blinked, surprised by the gesture. You're still the same clown as always. No, I've evolved. Now I'm a clown with a good car. Bonnie let out a contained laugh, but her eyes betrayed something more, a twinge of discomfort that she quickly disguised. Go, Elena, accept it. I still have to stop by the pharmacy before going home, so it's better if you go with him. Are you sure? Elena asked, noticing the slight forced tone in her friend's voice. Of course, Bonnie replied with a short smile, but sincere enough not to raise suspicions. Besides, if he tries to drive like a maniac, it's better if someone keeps him under control. Ryan placed his hand on his chest, feigning offense. I'm an exemplary driver. That's an insult, okay. Elena smiled lightly. I hope so. Bonnie watched the two in silence, the wind tousling the strands of her hair as the sun slowly descended on the horizon. Elena took a step forward, her hand lightly touching the open door. She looked one last time at Bonnie, searching her face for any sign of discomfort. Are you really sure? Bonnie nodded, a small smile, but full of affection. Go, Lena, I'll see you later at the grill, right? Right. She turned to get into the car, and in the instant she bent down to sit, Ryan passed by Bonnie and stopped right beside her. For a moment, his playful smile softened. He leaned slightly and, before she could react, enveloped her in a quick, warm, but unexpected hug. Hey, Bonnie blinked, surprised. Don't get jealous, Bonnie, he said in a low tone, almost laughing, near her ear. I promise I'm not leaving you out. Bonnie rolled her eyes, lightly pushing his shoulder. You're impossible. And irresistible. More like irritating. He gave a satisfied smile, pulling away with that provocative air that only he could maintain. He twirled the key on his fingers once more and went around to the driver's side. Elena watched him with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. When he got into the car and the engine roared, a firm and full-bodied sound filled the air. Bonnie crossed her arms, shaking her head as the engine sound reverberated. Of course his car would have to roar like he talks, too loud. Elena laughed from the passenger seat, looking at her through the open window. See you later, okay. Go already before he decides to do a drift in the parking lot. Ryan leaned slightly out the window, winking at Bonnie. No promises. She just huffed, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a smile. The car began to move smoothly, and the golden reflection of the evening spread over the body as the skyline gained distance. Bonnie stood still for a few seconds, watching the vehicle disappear around the curve, her heart beating in a strange rhythm, something between nostalgia and a twinge of something she preferred not to admit. Welcome back, Ryan, she murmured softly, before sighing and heading to her own car. Chapter 9 Planning a movie night together. It was the end of the afternoon in Mystic Falls, and the town exuded that familiar tranquility as always. The sun was slowly setting on the horizon, tinting the sky with golden and orange hues that reflected on the serene waters of the river. The cobblestone streets of the center gleamed under the warm light, while the old clock in the square marked the hours with a soft sound that echoed into the distance. Some people were still walking along the sidewalks near Mystic Falls High School, but all averted their gaze when a black skyline crossed the street, breaking the calm of the evening for a moment. Inside the car, the initial silence was not uncomfortable. Elena gazed out the window, her face gently bathed in the golden glow of the sunset. When she woke up that morning, she never would have imagined she'd end the day heading home with Ryan. She couldn't explain the whirlwind of emotions enveloping her. The longing, the relief, the confusion, all mixed in an impossible knot to untie. And, as if her mind had decided to torture her, memories began to surface, one after another. The day they built a fortress of sheets in the living room of his house, swearing it was their castle. The easy laughter, the smell of popcorn, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Or when he fell off his bike trying to impress her, getting up with a scraped knee and a goofy smile from someone who didn't care about the pain. In the summer when he held her hand for the first time, nervous, hesitant, while the sun burned more than the touch between them. But the memories didn't stop there, they brought everything back to that night. Why was she remembering that now? It had been so long. But ever since the moment she learned that Ryan had returned to Mystic Falls, that memory wouldn't leave her head. It was as if her mind insisted on taking her back to that edge, the exact point between what they had been and what they could have been. What if they had crossed that line? How would things have turned out? Probably strange, of course, and maybe she, Bonnie, and Caroline wouldn't even be as close anymore. It took quite a while, after all, for everything to go back to normal between them after that. Still, she couldn't push the questions from her mind. Maybe she had thought about all of it, remembered all of it, just because she was alone with him. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to break the silence with a light joke, like she used to, but the words simply wouldn't come. Fortunately, she didn't have to. It's funny, Ryan commented, pulling her from her reverie. The streets are still the same, but it seems like time moved differently here. Elena turned her gaze from the window, directing it toward him. You were only gone for 3 years. It wasn't 10 years like you make it sound when you talk that way. 3 years can be an eternity, he replied, keeping his eyes on the road, especially when everything changes without you noticing. She fell silent. For a moment, she wanted to respond, but the words died before reaching her lips. Instead, she just watched him, unconsciously biting her lower lip lightly. Ryan had truly matured and become even more handsome. Those green eyes, so rare, seemed to oscillate between the deep moss of ancient forests and the sharp gleam of precious stones under the rain. His face, of an almost unreal beauty worthy of an Asian celebrity, seemed sculpted to perfection, and his black hair, styled in a rebellious way, only enhanced his natural charm. And then there was his body, firm, defined, simply marvelous. She swallowed hard, averting her gaze too quickly, as if she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. But it was too late. The heat had already risen through her body, burning under her skin. Part of her wanted to get closer, to test if that distance between them still existed, if time had really changed everything or if there was still something there. She snapped out of her thoughts upon hearing the young man's voice beside her. Do you still live in the same house? Ryan asked, as if wanting to start any conversation. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, not much has changed there. I mean, except for the fact that everyone grew up and moved on with life. He gave a slight smile and said, That's good, if everyone grew up and moved on with life, that means you're not going to bed early and forgetting to do your homework anymore, right? She let out a short laugh. Still remembering my academic failures, huh? Of course, he replied, smiling. They're precious memories. You mean, reasons to tease me. That works too. Quote. If you must know. Elena shook her head and said with a sigh, I still have trouble doing homework, often, I forget and end up going to sleep. In that sense, I haven't changed. I figured as much. Ryan gave an ironic smile. Before Elena could respond, he asked, Do you still listen to the fray? Elena looked surprised. You remember that, how could I forget? You played that song How to Save a Life every time you fought with me. She laughed, shaking her head. And you said it was too much drama for such a small problem. And you said I didn't understand anything about feelings. Maybe I was right. Ryan smiled faintly, resting his arm on the window, his gaze still on the road, but his tone of voice took on a theatrical air when he replied. Maybe you were. After all, I was just a boy trying to decipher a girl who listened to the fray as if the band had all the answers in the universe. Elena raised an eyebrow, laughing. And you thought Coldplay solved everything with a melancholic song about the sky and stars. Hey, he retorted, pretending offense, Coldplay is pure philosophy. Fix you should be studied in schools. Only you think that. She laughed genuinely this time. How cruel, Lena. Elena, still between laughs, replied. All right, Coldplay philosopher. I admit Fix you got to me in 1 or 2 bad moments. But only because you insisted on playing it on repeat until I gave in. My victory. See, we're compatible even in life's soundtracks. Elena turned her face toward him, the smile still lingering on her lips. Compatible even in life's soundtracks, huh? Ryan continued with a carefree expression as he said, Hey, it's a start. Who knows, maybe we still match in something else, like pepperoni pizza and bad movie marathons. She laughed, shaking her head. Bad movies? You mean those ones you insisted were misunderstood works of art? Exactly, he replied, pointing at her lightly. I always had good taste. The world just wasn't ready to understand Sharknado yet. Elena burst into laughter, spontaneous, almost childlike. For a second, her sound seemed to fill the entire car. My God, you still defend that movie? Absolutely. A flying shark is the perfect metaphor for an existential crisis about how stupid people are. Or about the boredom of a teenager with nothing to do on a Saturday night. Touché. Ryan shrugged, amused. But let's face it, you loved watching too. Pretending to hate it was part of the charm. Elena turned her face to the window, but couldn't hide the smile. Maybe I only watched because you made the popcorn. Ryan pretended a dramatic sigh. I knew it. All that effort, all those bad movies, in the end you just wanted my popcorn. It wasn't just the popcorn, Elena retorted, laughing. It was also the soda you spilled on the couch every time you got excited. Hey, accident. That lid was defective. You said that 5 times that night. And I still believe it. I'm a man of convictions. Elena shook her head, laughing. It was funny how talking to him felt natural again. There was no longer that awkwardness from the reunion, the hesitation from the start of the day. Gradually, the old rhythm returned lightly, full of irony, silly teasing that seemed to only make sense between them. You're still the same, Ryan, she said finally, with a half smile. Sarcasm, irony, and that irritating confidence. It's part of the charm, he replied, adjusting the rearview mirror. And you're still, how can I put it, predictably unpredictable. That doesn't even make sense. It does. You always say you're going to change, but you stay the same. And I like that. Elena blinked, slightly surprised by the honesty in his tone. You're good with words, you know. I learned from you. You were always better at putting feelings into things. I just listened and pretended to understand. She laughed again, and the conversation stayed light. They moved on to debating which movie was worse, Twilight or Plan 9 from Outer Space, and between one joke and another, the laughter became more constant. Ryan recalled the times they climbed onto her roof to watch the stars and she pretended she could recognize the constellations. Elena, in turn, told about the last Mystic Falls party she tried to enjoy but ended up falling asleep on the couch before midnight. The conversation flowed as if they had never truly been apart, as if the years had been just a pause, not a real distance. There were moments when neither said anything, and even so, the silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, familiar, as if the simple fact of being there, sharing that small space, was enough. Gradually, the jokes gave way to more subtle memories, childhood stories, teachers they hated, the diner where they skipped class, the feeling that everything was simpler before. Elena talked about Bonnie and Caroline, how things had changed, the new responsibilities. Ryan listened attentively, as if every word from her was important. Sometimes he responded with small observations, other times he just smiled, letting the sound of her voice fill the car. And it was like that, in those several minutes of memories and laughs, that the atmosphere between them began to transform without them noticing. The invisible barrier that time had created dissolved little by little. When Elena realized, they were already turning the corner onto her street. The white gate in the porch with the lights on approached, marking the end of the journey and, in a way, the end of that bubble moment, where the world seemed to have stopped just for the two of them. She took a deep breath, her heart tightening in a mix of nostalgia and calm. Ryan slowed down and parked in front of the Gilbert house, the engine purring low before silencing completely. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, turning a bit in her seat. The yellowish light from the street lamp illuminated the car's interior enough to reveal the light smile on her lips. Thanks for the ride, Ryan, she said, her voice soft, almost shy. He turned his gaze to her, the corner of his lips lifting in a calm half-smile. You don't need to thank me, Lena. I'd always bring you back home. She laughed, trying to disguise the tension that arose with that look. Well, since you're offering to be my personal driver, I'll take advantage of it. Ryan raised an eyebrow, curious. Oh yeah. Elena rested her hand on the door handle but kept looking at him. Later I'm going to the grill with Bonnie and Caroline, and you promised to stop by there, remember? Can you pick me up? Of course, he replied immediately, without hesitating for a second. I'll come by here later, without fail. She nodded, satisfied, but before she opened the door, he added, with a light tone, though the smile on his lips gave away the double meaning. And, who knows, after the grill, we could have a movie night. Just the two of us. Like old times. Alina's heart gave a small leap. She blinked, her smile faltering for an instant before returning, but there was something different in it now. A movie night, huh? She replied, playing with the tone, but her voice came out lower than intended. You never give up on those nostalgic ideas, do you? Not when they're good, he said, glancing at her sideways. Elena looked away, but couldn't contain the small smile that appeared at the corner of her mouth. All right, Coldplay philosopher, she murmured, opening the door. After the grill, we can plan to do that. If I don't want to sleep first, of course. Ryan laughed, shaking his head. You, sleep before a movie? Impossible. I won't let you, don't worry. I want to see you try. She got out of the car and closed the door softly, still smiling. Before turning to climb the porch steps, she looked at him one more time, a quick glance, but full of something even she couldn't explain. See you later, Ryan. See you, Lena. The Skyline stayed parked there for a few seconds, even after she entered the house. Ryan watched the porch lights reflect on the windows, thoughtful, the same calm smile on his face. And when he finally started the car and drove off down the silent street, a thought crossed his mind with an almost dangerous certainty. That night would be very fun. Chapter 10 Training. The rumble of the Skyline's engine slowly faded as Ryan parked in the building's underground garage. He switched off the headlights and pulled the handbrake. For a few seconds, he stayed there, head resting against the seat, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. His expression was calm and indifferent, a sharp contrast to the face he had shown earlier in front of the girls with complicated pasts, or the friends of his predecessor. Faking emotions was easy for someone who had done it all his life. But now, alone, there was no need for masks, he could allow himself to act the way he wanted. He grabbed his backpack from the back seat and stepped out of the car, feeling the slightly cooler garage air touch his face. The white ceiling lights flickered from time to time, and the distant sound of footsteps echoed somewhere. As he pressed the elevator button, Ryan leaned his shoulder against the wall, his gaze unfocused. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. He stepped inside, resting against the metal wall as the panel indicated the slowly rising floors, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th floor, the elevator stopped with a slight jolt. Ryan stepped into the silent hallway. He walked to the end, where a modern-looking door awaited. He turned the key, and the soft click of the lock echoed faintly. As soon as he entered, silence greeted him. He closed the door and walked calmly toward his bedroom. Once inside, he tossed his backpack onto the bed and let out a long sigh. The room was spacious and tidy, blending sobriety and modernity. The walls were a soft gray, contrasting with the dark wooden floor. A neatly made double bed, white sheets, and a thick gray quilt. Above the headboard hung a black and white autographed photograph of the band Kansas, something that had belonged to his father and which he inherited for also being a big fan of that rock band. A discreet shelf beside it held a few books, an old camera, and a pocket watch that seemed to have history behind it. Broad windows with sheer curtains allowed the sunset light to seep in, painting the room in a soft gold. Ryan removed his overcoat, throwing it over the chair by the desk, and went to the bathroom. The sound of running water soon filled the room. Steam rose, fogging the mirror. He let the water fall over the back of his neck for several long minutes. After the shower, he put on black sweatpants, a black hoodie over a simple t-shirt of the same color. The soft fabric brought immediate comfort. He dried his hair quickly with a towel, leaving it slightly messy, and left the bedroom. The living room welcomed him with a warm, modern atmosphere. The space was wide and open, with large glass windows overlooking downtown Mystic Falls, the city lights beginning to shine, flickering in shades of orange and white. A light beige couch dominated the space, accompanied by a dark wooden coffee table and a plush gray rug that added a touch of elegance. On the wall, a large, slim TV, and just below it, a shelf filled with books, records, and a small collection of old vinyls. The soft glow of the light fixtures reflected off polished surfaces, and the distant sound of the city drifted in through the glass balcony. Ryan dropped onto the couch, his body relaxing completely. He stretched, arms extended above his head, releasing a brief sigh of relief. "Ha," he exhaled, resting his head on the back of the couch. "It's been a while since I've felt at home." Silence replied, broken only by the faint chirping of crickets and the wind outside. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then glanced sideways at the shimmering reflection of the city in the balcony glass. His mind was full of thoughts about the future, about what he would do in this world. There were so many desires, so many plans that a feeling of anticipation filled him completely. He felt excited just imagining what was to come. Today was only the beginning of a life far more thrilling than the one he had left behind, that much he had no doubt about. Still, the future wasn't the only thing on his mind. Even if it was the main reason for his anticipation, something else intrigued him, the strange fact that his random past in this new world seemed tailor-made for him. Everything fit together too perfectly, as if someone had crafted the ideal life according to his tastes and preferences. It became even more evident as the day went on. He had never considered himself a lucky person. In fact, he despised the very concept. Luck, in his view, was just an excuse used by the weak to justify chance. So why did it suddenly seem to be smiling at him? What was even more curious was that, in this new world, he not only lived close to the original cast of the series he once watched as a mere spectator, but he was also the center of attention for 3 incredibly attractive girls. During his teenage years, he had almost spent a night with all 3 at once, something that, back then, felt like nothing more than a bold dream of a hormone-fueled adolescent. Now, however, a single look or smile was enough for them to fall under his charm. Honestly, he had no doubt he could sleep with Elena that very night, or if not her, Caroline would be a very solid second option. As for Bonnie, she would be a bit harder. She was a pure-natured girl, someone who, as far as he knew, had never slept with any man. During that night of truth or dare, he had been her only experience and, in a way, that only made the idea of winning her over even more tempting. But he was thinking too much about this. And if there was one thing that always worked when thoughts began to pile up, it was training. At least, it worked when he was still in the army, in his past life. He stood up slowly, stretching his shoulders, and walked to the kitchen to grab a bottle of water before heading toward the elevator. The entire building was enveloped in near absolute silence. The corridor lights remained on, but the absence of voices or footsteps made the place feel almost intentionally isolated. After all, the building was his. Or rather, it belonged to his family. Ryan had inherited the building from his parents. Originally, they intended to rent it out, but never did. Maybe because it was too large for the size of the town, or maybe because, deep down, they wanted him to have a place of his own, away from everything. Now, only the top floor, the penthouse, was occupied. The rest was empty. When the elevator stopped on the 4th floor, the doors opened with a low hiss. Ryan stepped out and turned on the lights. The space was large and open, without partitions, an entire floor designed to be transformed into something, a gym, a hall, or whatever else. But he kept it as it was, clean concrete, white walls, wide windows with the curtains drawn back. His footsteps echoed until they faded. He set the bottle on the floor, pushed his hoodie sleeves up to his elbows, and stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath. He raised his right hand, slowly spreading his fingers, and in the next instant, a dark, dense crimson aura began to form around it. The air around him vibrated almost imperceptibly, as if the atmosphere itself rejected the presence of that energy. Cursed energy flowed naturally, running like living blood beneath his skin. Ryan watched the phenomenon closely. From what he knew, proper emotional control was the key to channeling cursed energy. Another important point was that most people who became sorcerers and learned to wield this energy believed it needed to flow from a specific point in the body. Instinctively, many assumed cursed energy began from negative feelings stored in the stomach and then spread throughout the body. However, this fragmented view slowed the energy flow. To truly understand the cycle of cursed energy, one had to exist in the world with mind, body, and soul acting as one, a complete unit. Fortunately, he didn't need to worry about the mechanics. Almost all of the control he possessed over cursed energy was inherited from the King of Curses himself. Technically, only Satoru Gojo surpassed the king in this aspect, since the, divided into 2, possessed the 6 eyes which granted perfect energy control. It was stated in the manga that without the 6 eyes even Satoru Gojo would not match the King of Curses in cursed energy manipulation. And he could feel it firsthand, the flow of his cursed energy responded to his will with absolute obedience. He rotated his wrist, channeling the energy and reinforcing his body. With a sharp movement, he struck the air. The blow sliced through it with a dry, deep crack. The pressure created by his punch slammed into the empty concrete ahead, lifting a cloud of dust that spread across the floor, dancing under the artificial light. Ryan remained steady, feet firmly planted. Through cursed energy reinforcement, a person can significantly enhance their physical abilities. Defensively, users can coat their skin with cursed energy, toughening the body and increasing the ability to block curse-related attacks. The same technique can be used offensively, imbuing physical strikes with cursed energy to make them superhuman. For example, in the Jujutsu manga, Aoi Todo managed to crush a curse, several trees, and even breach Yuji's defense with a single cursed-infused punch. Despite being physically weaker, Yuta compensated by reinforcing his body with cursed energy, allowing him to throw a car back at Yuji. Conventional weapons can also be imbued with cursed energy to increase their power. However, infusing large amounts at once can damage or even destroy the equipment. For this reason, sorcerers typically imbue only small amounts at a time. By applying moderate amounts over time, an ordinary weapon can be turned into a powerful cursed tool. He directed the energy toward his legs, shaping the reinforcement with precision. Then he moved. The first step was a blur. The sharp thud of his foot hitting the concrete echoed through the room like a muffled gunshot. In less than a second, Ryan crossed half the hall. The air cracked behind him, leaving a trail of wind and dust. He returned to his starting point and repeated the movement, this time reinforcing his torso and arms as well to balance the force. In a fraction of a second, he vanished from the center of the hall and reappeared near the windows. His reflection in the glass appeared for an instant, red-gray eyes gleaming in the dim light, the air around him trembling under the pressure of a dark crimson aura. He paused for a moment and drew the cursed energy back inside. Slowly, his eyes returned to their original color. A faint smile curved his lips as he noticed that peculiarity. Setting that aside, Ryan resumed training. He adjusted the energy flow within his body, redirecting reinforcement in microcircuits, a technique used only by high-level sorcerers to prevent energy waste. The result was immediate. His body began to move with an almost unnatural fluidity. This time, he dashed in zigzag patterns, disappearing and reappearing in different parts of the hall like a specter. He experimented with various combinations: instant strike reinforcement, lateral bursts, reverse movements, even short propulsion jumps. Every action was precise, reflecting a soldier accustomed to training in silence. The following hours dragged on with steady, intense rhythm. He alternated between body reinforcement and fine control, testing the circulation speed of the energy through his muscles, the impact of his blows, and the recovery time. Strikes, dodges, movements, flow variations. 2 hours later, Ryan finally stopped. It was almost 7:30 p.m., and unfortunately, he needed to end his training. Time to socialize a bit, he murmured to himself, lightly bored. He deactivated the flow completely and walked to the elevator. He ascended back to the penthouse calmly. Entering the apartment, he headed straight to the bedroom, removed his hoodie, and tossed it onto the chair. He picked up his phone from the desk. The screen lit up with a sequence of notifications. Messages from Elena, Bonnie, and Caroline. Elena was asking if he was going to Mystic Grill as promised and whether that ride they'd agreed on earlier was still happening. Bonnie had sent a simple, "You coming today?" followed by a curious emoji. Caroline had left a short, energetic voice message mentioning an unmissable night. Ryan read them all with an amused smile. He typed casual replies. To Elena, "Sure, I'll be there in 15. To Bonnie, "Probably. Don't disappear before I arrive." To Caroline, "I'll stop by, but don't drag me to dance." He locked the phone and set it on the table. Then he moved to the mirror, fixing his still slightly damp hair, and opened the wardrobe. He chose a black, high-collar shirt, tight enough to highlight his physique without looking forced. Over it, he put on a modern, long-cut black overcoat, the lightweight matte fabric flowing smoothly with every step. His slim-fit dark pants stood out only for their precise stitching. On his feet, polished black leather boots reflected the light just right, completing the outfit. No excessive accessories. Only a matte black watch on his left wrist and a silver ring on his right index finger, subtle, yet enough to draw attention in a refined way. Fully dressed, he grabbed his wallet and phone before leaving the apartment and heading down to the garage. _AN, everyone, I wanted to clarify a few doubts that have been appearing in the comments. First, no, my story was not written using artificial intelligence. I've been writing for many years, it's honestly my hobby and my passion. I know that nowadays a lot of people use AI for everything, so the question naturally comes up, but that's not the case here. And about the argument, oh, but he's posting 6 stories at once, how is that possible? Man, most of these stories I've been writing for months already. Many of them were on my Patreon, completed or nearly completed, and I only decided to bring them here to Webnovel now. So there's nothing miraculous about it, just planning and accumulated writing time. Another thing I've seen readers mention, oh, it's full of details, oh, the text is too verbose. What I can say is, I'm sorry for having developed this style. When I started, back then, writing a Percy Jackson fanfic on Spirit Fanfics, everyone criticized my lack of detail, the absence of emotion, weak dialogue, and said my writing sounded robotic. I spent years trying to improve that, it wasn't easy. I tested styles, changed a lot, experimented with different techniques. I still study, I still make mistakes, and I'm still trying to evolve. So yes, sometimes I exaggerate on the details, sometimes I describe too much. It's part of my growth process as a writer. Sorry for the small rant, but I wanted to be honest with you all. In the end, constructive criticism is always welcome, and toxic criticism is something I simply ignore. And truly, thank you for all your support. Every comment, every view, every person who follows my work, all of it means a lot to me. Chapter 11. I'm going to be a billionaire so easily. Ryan walked through the silent garage toward the black skyline. The cold lights reflected off the flawless bodywork, creating a metallic sheen that contrasted with the dense shadows of the underground. He opened the driver's door, got in, and started the car. The engine answered with a deep, satisfying growl. He fastened his seatbelt, rested his hands on the steering wheel, and took a deep breath. There was something comforting about driving alone at night, something that had always brought him peace, from his past life until now. Before leaving, he connected his phone and put on a playlist he himself called Dean Winchester Mode, classic rock, heavy riffs, raw guitars, that empty road, absolute freedom vibe. The first song began with an unmistakable solo, Back in Black, one of his favorite songs, and Ryan, without realizing it, began to hum softly, following the rhythm as he drove out of the garage. Mystic Falls at night was a quiet town. The streets were lit by old lampposts that cast a yellowish glow on the sidewalks. The colonial-style houses displayed warm lights in their windows. Some residents were still chatting on their porches, while the wind gently swayed the tall trees. The skyline moved forward unhurriedly, cutting through the city's silence with its deep growl and the soundtrack of the 70s filling the interior. Ryan drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming the chorus with a faint smile. He was relaxed, light, almost in a good mood. After a few minutes, he turned onto the Gilberts Street. The house was exactly as it always had been, cozy, with the downstairs lights on and the porch illuminated by soft lamps. At least, for now, it still wasn't at risk of being burned down by a humanity-off vampire Elena, something that, hopefully, wouldn't happen anytime soon. Ryan parked across the street, leaving the engine idling for a few moments before shutting it off. Silence, only crickets and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. He picked up his phone and typed, "I'm here." The reply came almost instantly, as if Elena had been holding the phone in her hand. "I'm coming, just 1 minute." Ryan tilted his head slightly to the side, a small smile appearing. "She always says that, but in my dear past memories she was usually 10 minutes late," he murmured, amused, while continuing to hum softly and keep the rhythm with his finger on the steering wheel. His eyes remained fixed on the phone screen, a simple model that looked nothing like the ultra-modern devices that existed in the life he had come from. But it did the job. It was 2009, after all. Technology was still crawling compared to what he knew. And in that loose, almost random thought, an idea crossed his mind like a lightning bolt. Bitcoin. Ryan froze for a moment, blinking slowly as he pondered. As far as he remembered, Bitcoin had been launched earlier that same year, and it was still at a ridiculously low price. Could it be? Could he really take advantage of that? His first impulse was almost comical, a mixture of disbelief and very welcome greed. If he bought Bitcoin now, literally now, at the very beginning, he could multiply his fortune to absurd levels in the future. He wouldn't even need much, a few $100s would be enough, and years later, he would be swimming in money. Although he had never really been someone overly concerned about money, and if he were, he would never have enlisted in the army or devoted his past life to military service, he recognized that, in this new world, he could very well take advantage of the opportunity to get rich. After all, unlike the vampires there, he did not possess compulsion, supernatural charm, or any mystical trick capable of opening doors with a simple look. All he would have in his favor would be his skills, his intelligence, and the resources he managed to gather on his own. In the end, both in his past life and in this one, he knew that money was a tool as useful as any weapon he had ever wielded. He let out a silent laugh, shaking his head. "I'm going to become a billionaire in this life so easily it's almost comical," he murmured to himself with a mischievous smile. Ryan leaned back in the seat, analyzing every detail carefully. Although he knew, with absolute certainty, that Bitcoin existed in that period and that its value was practically negligible in 2009, he also recognized a crucial point: that world, as similar as it was to the old real world he knew, was not the same. It was a world based on the series The Vampire Diaries, where the former actors who had played the roles had, in fact, become those characters, existing as real beings. Nothing guaranteed that the financial market would behave exactly as he remembered, nothing assured that the explosion in value would be identical. Even so, when he put the risks and the advantages on the scale, the cost of trying was practically nil. If he bought now and the future followed the known flow, his profit would be stratospheric. If the future diverged, at most he would lose an irrelevant amount for someone like him, especially considering his ability to make money easily in any context. In the end, the conclusion came in a pragmatic way: it was an extremely low-risk bet for incalculable potential return. This life definitely had its advantages. Determined to take advantage of this opportunity, and taking advantage of the fact that Elena would still take a little while, he decided to research more deeply on his phone, driven by pure curiosity. It didn't take long to find results. The creator of Bitcoin had not announced anything in newspapers, not even on Reddit, which, at that time, was still small. Instead, he had publicized his project on cypherpunk forums and cryptography mailing lists. After a few minutes browsing old threads and technical archives, he finally found what he was looking for. Still, he did not feel anxious to acquire the software necessary to mine Bitcoin, at least, not for now. He had a date that night. He put his phone in his pocket and lifted his gaze toward the door of the house, having noticed movement before even hearing it, courtesy of the heightened awareness of his surroundings that he had inherited from the King of Curses. Of course, an Elena Gilbert minute was, in fact, 10. At least that hadn't changed. That was the only thing that crossed his mind. But when she finally appeared on the porch, Ryan swallowed any desire to tease her about the delay. Elena walked down the steps, each step a cruel reminder of how that body liked to test his sanity. The tight black skirt, made of soft fabric, hugged her hips like a second skin, elongating her endless legs even more. On top, the wine-colored, thin-strapped blouse dipped into a discreet but treacherous neckline, enough to draw the eye, especially when the fabric adjusted to her slim waist and slid over her bare shoulders that were covered by the short leather jacket, open in the front, adding a touch of rebellion that made the whole outfit seem designed to provoke. Her hair fell in loose waves, capturing the porch light as if made of liquid silk. The light pink lipstick highlighted her full mouth, and he felt his stomach tighten with a magnetism that had no name. She crossed the street toward the car, and he followed every movement. Elena opened the passenger door, got in, and closed it carefully. Her perfume, sweet, warm, lightly floral, filled the interior of the car almost instantly, mixing with the smell of leather and the low music vibrating softly through the speakers. Ryan took a second to look at her directly. 1 second longer than he meant to. But when he finally came out of his stupor, it was simply impossible not to smile. "You look," he began, his voice lower than he intended, "very beautiful." Elena turned her face toward him with a slow smile, and her eyes traveled over his body without any shame. The black high-collared shirt, tight enough to highlight his physique without looking forced, that modern, long-cut overcoat, also black, whose light fabric, the dark, simple slim-fit pants, stood out only for their precise stitching. On his feet, polished black leather boots reflected the light just enough to complete the ensemble. No excessive accessories. Just a matte black watch on his left wrist and a silver ring on his right index finger. She noticed all of it. Her lips curved into an almost involuntary smile, warm and soft, but with that touch brought on by the new phase of her life, more woman, more aware of her own desire, and dangerously aware of him. She tilted her head slightly, watching him for one more second than would be considered casual, and then let out a compliment that seemed to be born from both her heart and her instincts. "You look ridiculously handsome today too, Ryan." Her voice came out low, loaded with that sincerity she only let show when emotion surpassed any attempt at control. And, as much as she tried to keep the comment casual, her eyes completely betrayed her intention. There was admiration, nostalgia, and an intense interest that had only grown since he had reappeared in her life. Deep inside, there were some complex emotions in her heart. When Ryan disappeared, she learned to move on because there was no choice. Then came her parents, and her world simply collapsed. For years, she carried the feeling that everything she loved drifted away or died. And then Ryan came back. It was impossible not to feel her heart tighten, not from sadness, but from a kind of relief she thought she would never have again. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt truly happy. And that, by itself, was already terrifying. But there was another layer, much less poetic and much more human, because Ryan was incredibly hot, with that absurdly defined body, with that deep voice, with that gaze focused only on her. Every detail of him seemed designed to make her lose her breath, and the awareness of that only made her breathing heavier and her skin hotter. On the other hand, not knowing the effect he was having on the girl at his side, Ryan let his smile grow slowly, adopting the deliberately conceited tone he always used when he wanted to provoke. "Well," he said, tilting his chin slightly, "I couldn't expect anything less from myself, right? A famous model in the East can't disappoint." The line came out light, full of humor. Elena sighed immediately, rolling her eyes the way she did when he said something absurd just to get a reaction out of her. "You're still unbearably conceited," she murmured, but a small smile was already starting to appear at the corner of her lips. And then, half without meaning to, her fingers touched her own jacket, adjusting it shyly. She looked away toward the window, her cheeks gaining a soft blush. "And, she swallowed hard, speaking more softly, "just so you know, Ryan. I was a little late because I was trying to look nice today." Ryan watched her for a moment, and his expression softened before being swallowed by the same old smile. "You succeeded," he said without hesitation. "Actually, too much." He turned his face forward for a moment, as if mentally evaluating the night that was to come, before adding with a naturally loaded humor. "I'm going to have to stay close at the grill later. Can't let any idiot guy think he has a chance to get close like that." Elena's eyes widened slightly, surprised by his confidence and perhaps a little by what that meant. But soon the surprise dissolved into a soft, almost shy smile, the kind that appears when someone tries to hide their happiness and fails miserably. She bit her lower lip for a second, the gesture almost unconscious, before letting out a soft giggle that came out more like a relieved sigh. She leaned her body slightly toward him, her arm resting on the console between the seats, and her eyes shone with a mix of teasing and something sweeter, more vulnerable. "All right then, my personal bodyguard," she murmured, her voice coming out in a playful tone, but with that underlying trust that only appeared when she truly felt at ease. "I'm counting on you, okay? Don't let anyone steal my night." Ryan let his gaze linger for one more second in her eyes, those brown eyes that always seemed to hold a piece of late afternoon sky, before turning the key in the ignition. The skyline woke up with a low, almost lazy growl, as if the car knew the night was theirs. He adjusted the rearview mirror without hurry, his fingers sliding over the steering wheel with that calm of someone who had driven in situations far worse than a nighttime ride in Mystic Falls. "Relax," he said, his deep voice carrying a tone of certainty that left no room for doubt. "By my side, you're safer than anywhere on the planet." He put the car in gear, and the vehicle glided down the street smoothly, the sound of the engine blending with the rock track that still played softly. The yellowish light from the lampposts passed across the windshield in flashes, illuminating Elena's face for brief moments, highlighting the soft contour of her chin, the spark in her eyes as they looked at him for a second that seemed longer than it should have been. Her smile faltered, not from discomfort, but from really feeling how much that meant. It was beautiful, it was intense, it was a relief she wasn't used to since her world began to shatter after her parents' death. And, of course, it also made her stomach do that dangerous little flip. "Okay," she murmured, looking away for a moment, her cheeks gaining that soft blush she tried to ignore. "Then I'm going to trust you." Ryan didn't answer right away. "You should," he finally said. "I'm reliable as hell." Elena laughed in that spontaneous way, as if he had just dismantled the tension with a typical line she had missed. The road ahead stretched out in gentle curves, surrounded by tall trees whose shadows danced as the skyline's headlights passed. The music changed to a slower track, Simple Man by Lynyrd Skynyrd, and the atmosphere inside the car became even more intimate, as if the outside world were miles away. Elena crossed her legs, adjusting her skirt with the movement. Her perfume seemed stronger there, trapped in the confined space, and Ryan registered that without taking his eyes off the road, although every fiber of his body was painfully aware of her provocation. She watched him from the side. She didn't hide it. She didn't want to hide it. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was dense, charged with something they didn't name, but that both of them felt. Chapter 12. Caroline Forbes was solemnly ignored. The night advanced slowly over Mystic Falls, wrapping the town in that characteristic silence that always seemed to hide more than it revealed. The narrow streets took on a yellowish glow beneath the old lampposts, while the brick and wood facades reflected the soft light as if they were part of a scene eternally trapped in the past. In the distance, one could hear the faint sound of a car passing by, perhaps someone heading home or going somewhere where the night was only just beginning. The breeze carried a slight scent of damp wood and night-blooming flowers, mingled with the welcoming stillness that always settled over the town after sunset. In the town center, the Mystic Grill had already opened its doors as usual, drawing in teenagers, exhausted workers, and anyone seeking, for a few hours, to forget their own dramas. The building, painted in a grayish-green tone, displayed simple architecture with straight lines, slightly worn by time but still solid and well-preserved. Above the windows, small decorative moldings reinforced the impression of an old structure. The canvas awning, a beige that was almost gray, stretched over the sidewalk with the name Mystic Grill stamped discreetly, while the main sign just above, in sturdy, illuminated white letters, stood out against the darker wall. The windows, with black shutters and reflective glass, allowed only glimpses of the interior bathed in the orange glow of neon signs. Inside, the atmosphere carried that unique blend of warmth and chaos, the constant hum of conversations, time-marked wooden tables, low lights that enveloped everything in an intimate ambiance, and the distinctive smell of frying food, beer, and something vaguely nostalgic, an aroma so familiar it always seemed to invite passers-by to come in and stay a while longer. The background music competed with the sound of voices and the occasional crack of pool balls being struck. Waiters hurried across the room with practiced haste, and among them was Vicky Donovan, balancing a tray in one hand, her simple uniform hugging her slim body, her restless gaze that of someone trying to keep her life upright with her own two hands. Jeremy Gilbert watched her from afar, biting his lip and gathering the courage to approach. He looked out of place there, shoulders tense, with that lost expression he'd carried since the summer. He took a deep breath and walked over to her. "Hey, Vic." She didn't even slow down. She just threw a quick glance over her shoulder. "I'm working," and she moved on, leaving no room for anything else. Vicky veered toward the table where Matt and Tyler were sitting. She set down the glasses with practiced efficiency, no ceremony. "Thanks, Vic," Matt said, giving a polite smile. "You need another round?" Vicky asked, looking straight at Tyler. Tyler leaned back in his chair with that arrogant confidence he thought was irresistible. "I'd love one." She just exhaled through her nose, a tired half-laugh, and walked away. Matt watched her go, then turned to Tyler, brow furrowed. "Please tell me you're not hooking up with my sister." Tyler raised his eyebrows as if the accusation were absurd. "I'm not hooking up with your sister." Matt sighed. "You're a complete idiot." Tyler didn't reply, his smile said everything Matt didn't want to think about. Jeremy, meanwhile, seized the moment when Vicky passed through the room again to catch up with her once more. This time she stopped, more out of obligation than desire, since she had to clear one of the tables. "Hey, what's your problem?" Jeremy asked, voice low, a little unsteady. "I mean, over the summer you act one way, but then school starts and you don't even care." Her gaze softened for just a second. "Look, Jeremy, I'm really grateful for the pills, but you can't keep following me around like a lost puppy." "When was the last time you had sex with a puppy?" He shot back, too quickly. "Hey, keep it down. I don't want to announce to the whole world that I deflowered Alina's little brother," Vicky hissed, frowning. "Yeah, and you deflowered him many, many times," Jeremy said ironically. Vicky finished tidying the table and turned toward him as she spoke. "We hooked up a few times while we were high. It's over. You need to back off before you ruin everything between me and Tyler." "Oh, Come on, the guy's a total idiot, Jeremy said, frowning. He just wants to sleep with you. Really? And what do you want? Vicky said, looking deep into his eyes before walking away, brushing his shoulder as she left him standing there in the middle of the grill, loud music playing and frustration burning in his chest. At that moment, Caroline and Bonnie walked through the door of the Mystic Grill. The two made their way through the noisy room, weaving between chairs and occupied tables, passing groups of teenagers who greeted them with quick waves. Caroline ignored half of them, she was too busy talking, gesturing wildly, and rolling her eyes dramatically. I just think it's extremely unfair, Caroline began, with the indignation of someone who had clearly been rehearsing that speech in her head for hours. That Ryan just gives Elena a ride and doesn't even think to offer us one too. Like, hello, we're his friends too, right? She crossed her arms, rolling her eyes theatrically. Because honestly, it feels like he has a certain favoritism toward Elena. And that's so typical. He shows up all nice, with that mysterious letting man smile, and boom, just Elena blinking twice and there he goes, turning into her personal chauffeur. Bonnie let out a long sigh, looking at Caroline like someone trying to calm a hurricane with words alone. Care, for the love of God, she murmured, pinching the bridge of her nose. You're making it sound like Ryan kidnapped Elena or something. This is exactly why I regret telling you. He just gave her a ride. One single ride. You don't need to open a congressional investigation over favoritism because of it. And let's be honest, if you really wanted a ride, you could have just asked instead of delivering this courtroom-worthy speech. Caroline threw up her hands as if Bonnie had just confirmed exactly what she was trying to prove. Bonnie, one ride is just the beginning. First it's the ride, then it's the parking lot. And you know perfectly well what happens in the parking lot. That's always where romances start, or explode, or drag on slow and tense in that way only Elena can make things. She whispered the last part as if revealing a highly confidential secret. Bonnie closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath, clearly gathering patience. Caroline, she murmured, with the gentle exhaustion of someone who had already accepted they were going to lose this argument anyway. I swear you come up with more conspiracy theories than any shady website on the internet. It's a ride. He's not proposing to Elena in the school parking lot. Caroline narrowed her eyes, leaning toward her friend with all the dramatic conviction in the world. But he could, because that's how it starts. First he gives her a ride. Then he parks. And then, boom, you blink and they're having a moment. And us, where do we fit in that equation? In the metaphorical back seat of his life. The two finally reached an empty table near the window, one of the few still available on that busy night. Bonnie collapsed into the chair with a deep sigh, while Caroline dropped her bag onto the seat beside her and scanned the room as if already assessing it for her next dramatic move. I'm going to order something to drink, because honestly, my stress levels are off the charts, Caroline announced, smoothing her hair with an automatic flick. Do you want anything? Not that I'll accept a no, because you clearly need sugar to deal with me. Bonnie just raised an eyebrow, exhausted but amused. Surprise me. Caroline nodded solemnly, as if she'd been given a critical mission, and marched toward the bar, already starting to tell some waitress about the ride tragedy as if it were a historic event. Bonnie shook her head alone, resting her chin in her hand. That was when Matt appeared, finally free from Tyler, who had dragged himself over to the pool table, and walked toward her with that hesitant air of someone who wasn't sure if he was invited, or too desperate to care. Hey, Bonnie, he smiled politely, with that slightly awkward kindness that had become typical of him in recent months. Can I? He pointed to the chair. Bonnie gestured for him to sit. Of course, Matt, go ahead, he settled in, running a hand through his hair nervously. So, how are you? I'm good, Bonnie smiled. I mean, aside from Caroline freaking out over a ride. Matt gave a soft laugh, but the smile quickly faded. He tapped his fingers on the table, restless inside, until he finally asked. Have you, by any chance, he paused, took a deep breath, and continued, has Elena said anything about me? Like, recently? Bonnie blinked, immediately recognizing the broken tone behind the question. And, as always, when the subject was Elena, she knew exactly where this was headed. Matt, I know. He raised his hands quickly, as if already defending himself from something she hadn't even said. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if she, misses me. Or if she remembers us. Bonnie bit her lip, choosing her words carefully. She cares about you, Matt. She always has. But you two, you went down different paths. That doesn't mean she forgot, it just means she's trying to move forward. In her own way. Matt nodded slowly, but he didn't look convinced. At that exact moment, Caroline returned carrying 2 drinks and an indignant expression that promised more chaos in a matter of seconds. "Oh, Matt, you're here," she said it with slight theatrical surprise, as if she hadn't practically grown up in the same places as him. "I didn't see you come in." Matt gave a half-shy, half-relieved smile that he wasn't being shooed away. "Hey, Caroline." Caroline slammed the glasses down on the table hard enough that Bonnie was almost sure one would slide off. She sat with rigid posture, eyes wide in an offended sigh that already announced, heavy drama incoming. "You won't believe the outrage that just happened at the bar." She pointed at herself, indignant. Caroline Forbes, was solemnly ignored. Bonnie closed her eyes for a moment, bracing for impact. "Caroline, please don't tell me it was just because someone took 3 extra seconds to serve you." 3 seconds? Bonnie Bennett, I dare say it was 5. 5 seconds. And you know that in Caroline time, that's practically a personal insult. Caroline placed a hand on her chest as if reliving real trauma. Matt opened his mouth to say something, probably an apology for not fully grasping Caroline's dramatic scale, but before he could form a complete sentence, Tyler's voice echoed from the pool table. "Matt, get over here quick, man." The tone wasn't urgent enough to be serious, but it was annoying enough to leave Matt visibly resigned. He narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at the 2 girls with a defeated expression. "I think I have to go." Bonnie tried to give an understanding smile. "Sure, go ahead." Caroline, on the other hand, raised an eyebrow as if she'd been offended again. "Seriously, what does he want you for? To watch him miss another perfect shot and blame the lighting?" Matt opened his mouth, hesitated, then just sighed. "It's Tyler. I need to stop him from doing, I don't know, something stupid." Bonnie nodded, understanding. Caroline crossed her arms, still indignant but letting it pass. "Fine, whatever, go, before he decides to throw a cue stick at someone's head." Matt smiled without humor, thanked them quietly, and walked away toward the pool table. Tyler was already yelling something about 2 sensational shots, though it looked anything but sensational. When he disappeared into the noise and lights, Caroline let out a sigh, pulled her drink closer, and took a long sip as if the fate of the universe depended on it. Bonnie did the same, though far more moderately, before resting her arms on the table. "So," Bonnie began, knowing she needed to carefully mediate her friend's mood. "What exactly happened at the bar? Besides you being ignored for 5 seconds. Caroline's eyes widened as if that alone were an unforgivable crime. "First of all, that should already be enough to arrest someone, but okay, let's focus." She leaned across the table, lowering her voice as if sharing explosive gossip. "The waitress, you know, the new one, the brunette." Bonnie already sighed. "Caroline, no, seriously." She looked at me like I'd asked her to sacrifice her soul to the cappuccino demon. "I only ordered 2 drinks. 2. I was super polite, too. Little smile, sweet voice, everything." Bonnie raised an eyebrow. And what was her crime?" "The way she answered me." Caroline mimicked the waitress, twisting her face into a blasé expression. "I'm coming." "Like, excuse me, you work here, sweetie. That's literally your job." Bonnie couldn't hold it in, she laughed. Caroline's mouth fell open, offended. "Bonnie, don't laugh. This is serious. It's just, you make it sound like she put a curse on you." Caroline narrowed her eyes, taking another dramatic sip. "If she had magic, she would have. Clearly she's jealous. I'm gorgeous, organized, I look amazing even when I'm annoyed, and I still walk into this decrepit establishment with elegance. She can't handle it." Bonnie brought a hand to her face. "Caroline, nobody's jealous because you ordered 2 drinks." Caroline ignored her, and besides, she was looking at me that way. Like, oh, here comes another problematic blonde. I felt it in the air. "Caroline, you are a problematic blonde," Bonnie said with complete serenity. Caroline's expression froze for half a second. "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that." "You heard it. Didn't hear it, did." Caroline took another sip and leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs like she was posing for a magazine cover. "Anyway, I just wanted decent service, a little respect, and maybe a discount because I'm a loyal customer." Bonnie laughed again. You've been here 3 times this week. Exactly. Caroline gestured with her free hand. Loyal customer. Bonnie shook her head, chuckling softly as she brought the glass to her lips. For a few moments, the two just sat there, drinking and watching the comings and goings of the grill. _AN. Did you enjoy the chapter? Then you should know that over on my Patreon you can read up to 10 chapters ahead for just $5 US. And yes, for that price, you also get full access to all of my content. That's right, cheaper than a snack, and with way more drama, action, and guaranteed emotional damage. My Patreon, patreon.com/Adam_Kadmon. To be continued. Thanks for watching.